Chapter 101. Yujie and Qing Yu looked at each other and didn't understand. In this way, she can do all the things when she has a chance to go out. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, with a smile on her lips. The more difficult it was to go out, the more she really wanted to do all the things. Nanny Zhou had to deal with the big things, but she could ask other servant girls to deal with the small things. Nanny Zhou couldn't go out, but the servant girls could go out. In fact, she could ask a servant girl to inform a person and look after a seller. Hearing that she was going to be sent back to her hometown, Madame D must be anxious to sell all the shops in her hands. On the other hand, she would certainly ask her mother's family in the capital city for help. "Yes, miss, I'm going now." Qin Wanru's words immediately reminded Yujie. She smiled and bowed respectfully. She looked at Qin Wanru with admiration and turned to find Nanny Duan. Although Qin Wanru was younger than her, Miss was smart and could think of everything. "Wait a minute, Qing Yu, you go to find Nanny Duan. After talking with Nanny Duan, go back to the yard. I'll go out with Yujie. And give Yujie and others the purses that you used to reward people. We need them later." Qin Wanru suddenly stopped her. Compared with Yujie, Qing Yu was more familiar with the people in the mansion. The purses that were used to reward people were filled with taels of silver. She suddenly remembered an important thing that must be done before leaving Jiangzhou. This person would be a great help to her in the future. Calculating the time, at this time, that person should be in Jiangzhou. "Miss, be careful." Qing Yu nodded, took out a few purses from her sleeve and handed them to Yujie. She left after warning her. "Yujie, can you go up this wall?" Qin Wanru raised her head and narrowed her eyes to look at the high wall beside her. She asked Yujie to stay not only because Qing Yu was familiar with the people in the mansion. "I'm afraid it's a little difficult. Although I'm strong, I'm afraid I can't jump up the wall." Yujie looked up at the wall and measured the height, thinking that she was not qualified. "Can I jump up the autumn frame when it flies over?" Qin Wanru touched her hand. Now it was completely healed, and there could be no accident. "Miss, what are you doing?" Yujie looked at the top of the wall and then looked at Qin Wanru. She asked worriedly. Mingqiu Nun asked her to keep an eye on her Mississippi. She didn't want her miss to have an accident after only one day here. Weren't all misses from noble families well behaved? Why would he want to climb the wall? "I just want to go out for a stroll, but I don't want the people in the manor to know." Qin Wanru took it for granted. She had done such things many times in the past, so it was easy for her to say this reason. "Will it be dangerous?" Yujie was still worried. "There won't be any danger. I'll just stroll around. Even if someone comes to me, Qing Yu knows how to deal with it." Qin Wanru smiled. Qing Yu had been by her side for so long that she had long understood her feelings. That was why she told her to be careful just now. "Miss, how are you going up?" Yujie was also smart. She immediately knew that Qin Wanru had done this kind of thing many times before. Thinking that it should not be dangerous, she looked at the high wall and said, "I jumped up by myself when I swung up." Qin Wanru raised her chin slightly and pointed to the top of the wall. Yujie measured the height in her heart and said, "If Miss can go up, I can also go up in your way." "That's not necessarily true. Qing Yu can't go up in my way." Qin Wanru thought of Qing Yu's clumsy look in the past and laughed. "If Miss can, I will definitely wait," Yujie said with certainty. "Okay, then watch carefully." The smile on Qin Wanru's face became more and more brilliant. "You stand behind first." Yujie obeyed and stepped back. When she was a distance away from the swing, Qin Wanru began to swing. Every time she stepped back from the branch in the same position, she swung higher and higher. At this time, her attention was all on the swing and she did not notice that there was a teenager standing outside the wall. He was surprised to see her slightly swinging over the wall. She swung so high. For the last time, when she swung to a similar position, Qin Wanru let go and jumped to the top of the wall. She grabbed the roof of the wall and her body shook. The teenager outside the wall and Yujia inside the wall were scared and ran to the bottom of the wall in a hurry, for fear that she would fall down accidentally. Qin Wanru calmed down and stabilized her body. She turned back to look inside and whispered, "Yujia, can you do it?" Seeing that Qin Wanru stabilized her body, Yujia was also relieved and nodded. "Miss, don't worry, I can do it." Although she didn't know how to swing, she saw Qin Wanru's way just now and felt that it was not difficult. Originally, she was more flexible and stronger than ordinary people. Sitting on the swing, Yujia pulled the rope above and sensed it. She raised her head and said to Qin Wanru, who was still on the high wall, "Miss, you go down first, or stay aside. I'm afraid that I will hit you." "Oh, wait a minute, I'll go down first." Qin Wanru looked around and felt that it was safer to go down. She took a few steps to the side, which was the trunk sticking out of the wall. She held the branch and carefully slid down. "It's the first time for me to see a miss from an aristocratic family climb over a wall and a tree. Well done, well done." Before she landed, she suddenly heard someone talking. Qin Wanru was so shocked that she almost fell from the tree. She quickly calmed down and slowly slid down. She turned her head and looked at the teenager who was leaning against the wall and watching the scene with an unfriendly look. Although there was a grass in the teenager's mouth, he was dressed in luxurious clothes and was full of noble air. At first glance, she knew that he was not an ordinary person. Behind him was a young servant, who looked about the same age as him. At this time, he was also looking at Qin Wanru with a smile. Like his master, he was also watching the scene. Qin Wanru pursed her pink lips. She didn't know this person, but it didn't prevent her from knowing that he was not ordinary. In her previous life, she had also seen some childs from aristocratic families, but the one in front of her seemed to be born with noble air and could not be an ordinary child. "Who are you?" Under the long eyelashes, a pair of big black eyes looked at the teenager who suddenly appeared in front of her with vigilance. "Why aren't you afraid? Why didn't you fall from the tree? I have already made a posture to catch you just now." The teenager looked up at the tree beside Qin Wanru and then looked at Qin Wanru. He sighed, as if it was a pity that Qin Wanru didn't fall and let him catch her. "Who are you?" Qin Wanru said unhappily. "Then who are you?" "The second miss of Ningyuan Army General's mansion." The teenager tilted his head and didn't answer her, but curiously looked up and down at her. It wasn't just because of her bravery in climbing over walls and trees that he had never seen from other young ladies of aristocratic families. It was also because of her appearance. She was already so outstanding at such a young age. How stunning would she be when she grew up? He didn't see her clearly because he was a little far away just now. At this time, he found that the girl in front of him not only had a stunning appearance, but also a bright and beautiful face. Her pink lips reflected her jade-like skin, which was white with pink, charming and moving. Even if she was just a girl, she was amazing. "What do you want?" Qin Wanru's eyes calmed down, and her long eyelashes fluttered twice. "Seeing you climb over the wall here, I'm curious." The teenager raised his head, threw down the grass in his hand, and strode over. Qin Wanru didn't know what he was going to do, so she carefully avoided him. However, she saw that he walked to the tree, reached out and hugged the trunk. After trying twice, he crossed his legs and climbed up very cleverly. After reaching the top of the wall, he turned back and sat on the wall. He proudly turned back and said to Qin Wanru below, "How is it? Isn't it awesome? When it comes to climbing trees, no one is better than me." Before he finished boasting, he felt that his back was hit heavily by something, and his body fell down involuntarily. Xiaoyozi rushed over and wanted to catch him. Xiaoyozi's hands and feet were very fast, and his own reaction was also fast. He reached out and grabbed a branch on the side to borrow some strength. When he fell down, he felt that the fall would not be too heavy. However, when he fell to the ground, he found that it was different from what he thought. Although Xiaoyozi was under him, he couldn't get up for a while. The teenager also felt very ashamed to lose such a person in front of the little beauty. He reached out and tried to prop himself up again, but his body was pressed heavily. His body, which had just propped himself up, fell down again. Xiaoyozi, who was under him as a meat cushion, snorted heavily and wailed like a ghost and howled like a wolf. "Master, don't move. If you press me again, my lower body will be gone." Qin Wanru looked at the scene in front of her in astonishment. The three people who were stacked together fell like this. Then she saw Yujie holding her waist with difficulty to get up, and the faces of the two people under her were twisted. She couldn't help laughing. The suddenness of this thing was really unexpected. How could it be so coincidental that Yujie jumped over the wall? "Yujie, are you okay?" Qin Wanru smiled and went forward to help Yujie, who had supported the teenager to stand up. "I'm fine. Who are these two people? Why are they so stupid to hit me and fall down?" Yujie twisted her waist and found that she was not hurt, so she was relieved. Then she looked at the two people under her and saw their twisted expressions. She couldn't stop laughing. Feeling that his body was light and hearing Yujie's words, the teenager understood that he had also been used as a meat cushion. No wonder he couldn't get up just now. He held his waist with difficulty to get up, and pulled up Xiaoyozi at the bottom with a grimace. Xiaoyozi stood up and twisted his body. He found that he only hurt from the fall, but there were no other injuries. Then he rushed to the young boy and patted the dust off his body while saying anxiously, "Master, are you okay?" "I'm fine." The teenager touched his waist, which was the most severely pressed. Fortunately, it was not a big problem to move now. It seemed that he was fine. "Are you really okay? Master, do you want to go back and let the accompanying imperial physician have a look? What if something really happens?" Xiaoyozi said worriedly. "What are you afraid of? It's not that I haven't fallen before. Look at the girl, she is fine. What can happen to me?" Being said by Xiaoyozi in front of the girl, the teenager felt particularly embarrassed. He patted his waist again, and then pushed Xiaoyozi away angrily, looking at the person standing behind him. Chapter 102. Where is she? Where is she? It's only been a while. I heard their laughter just now. Where is she? Eunuch Lu, where is she? The young boy blinked and asked. Eunuch Lu also turned around and looked around. He was also very confused. She's gone. Go and find her. The young boy stamped his feet, turned around and ran forward. He didn't believe that he couldn't catch up with them in such a short time. Seeing his master chasing after them, Eunuch Lu also hurriedly followed. When both of them were far away, Qin Wanru clapped her hands and appeared with Yujie. They were actually in the gap at the corner of the wall. In the crevice at the corner of the wall, there seemed to be a mansion of a rich family. At first glance, the crevice between the two walls seemed so small that it was almost impossible to hide someone. However, Qin Wanru, who had witnessed Qi Baiyu hiding there, knew that it was just the appearance, and it was not impossible to hide someone. After avoiding the inexplicable pair of master and servant, Qin Wanru left in the opposite direction with them, and then went to the most prosperous street in Jiangzhou Prefecture. There were a lot of people coming and going on the street, and the shops on both sides seemed to have excellent business. However, Qin Wanru didn't stop and went directly to a silk and satin shop. The silk and satin shop was very big. Yujie looked at it and thought that it might be the largest silk and satin shop in Jiangzhou Prefecture. It was bigger than the shops she saw just now. There were a lot of people going in and out of it, and most of them were women. Qin Wanru entered the silk and satin shop and looked around. There were a lot of silks and satin in it. At first glance, they were colorful and attractive, very beautiful. Qin Wanru didn't stop at the door of the shop, but went inside. There was a tailor-made clothing shop inside. She could also directly take the materials she liked here and ask the people here to measure and tailor the clothes for her. It was very convenient. Qin Wanru stood at the material in front of the tailor-made clothing shop. A shop assistant immediately ran out. At the sight of Qin Wanru, he knew that she was either rich or noble. He immediately nodded and bowed and said, "Miss, what do you like? Do you need to measure it here and then choose?" "Just these materials." Qin Wanru picked up a few pieces of cloth and looked at them. It seemed that she was not satisfied with them, so she was very picky. "If Miss doesn't like the clothes here, you can go upstairs. There are some embroidery and toggle and loop buttons on the clothes upstairs. If Miss likes them, you can pick some." The shop assistant pointed at the stairway. The stairway was on the side. It wasn't very big, and it wasn't very conspicuous. "Is there a lot of good material upstairs? Don't tell me all of them are like this." Qin Wanru put down the cloth in her hand with disgust and raised her head slightly. She was very arrogant and looked around the store. Obviously, she was not satisfied with all the cloth in front of her. "Our Miss only wants good materials. She doesn't care about money," Yujia answered cleverly. Looking at the surrounding materials, she was also full of disgust. So, this was a big customer. The shop assistant laughed happily. He pointed to the stairs on the side and led her up. "Miss, please go up. There must be some materials you like inside. Please go up and have a look." As he said, he walked up a few steps first, then turned back respectfully and politely turned his hand to the side. He nodded and bowed with a smile on his face. Qin Wanru nodded and went upstairs with Yujie. After the shop assistant led her upstairs, he went in to find a responsible supervisor on the second floor. Since she was a big customer, he naturally couldn't neglect her. Therefore, it was not a shop assistant who received Qin Wanru this time. There were indeed a lot of materials upstairs. Different from those piled up randomly downstairs, each piece of material occupied the same space. They were separated into categories and even had exquisite packaging on them. In one corner, there were many ready-made clothes accessories, such as exquisite toggle and loop buttons and embroidery. They were very beautiful, but also very expensive. However, since they were ready-made clothes accessories, they did not occupy a large proportion. There was only a counter in the northeast corner, which listed these accessories. Because they were inconspicuous and expensive, there were very few people at this counter. It could almost be regarded as empty. Qin Wanru now stood in front of this counter and asked the shop assistant to take out a few toggle and loop buttons and embroidery. She put them on the counter and looked at them carefully. "Miss, this kind of toggle and loop buttons is the first in our shop. There is no such toggle and loop buttons in the whole Jiangzhou. Even in our shop, there are not many such toggle and loop buttons." The supervisor bragged while pointing at the toggle and loop buttons that Qin Wanru just asked the shop assistant to take out. There were 4 types of toggle and loop buttons: plum, orchid, bamboo, and chrysanthemum. They were all very exquisite and beautiful, and even had some artistic conception in them. At first glance, one could know that they were not made by ordinary people. "Miss, look at these embroidery. Aren't they beautiful? If such embroidery is embroidered on clothes, your clothes will immediately become elegant and beautiful, just like the clothes worn by fairies in heaven." The supervisor almost pointed at the embroidery and flew to heaven. "A pair of things from my family is the best. If you wear it, you must be a fairy." Qin Wanru smiled slightly. As a supervisor, he was really good at talking. His bragging made people fly directly. "How many of these toggle and loop buttons do you have? And these embroidery?" Qin Wanru liked the few pieces that were taken out and asked with a smile. "There are 10 pairs of this kind of toggle and loop buttons. If Miss likes them." The steward smiled. Sure enough, she was a big customer. After so long, she hadn't touched any of these things. It seemed that she could definitely sell a few more today. Not enough. Qin Wanru shook her head. Not enough. The supervisor was stunned. One type of toggle and loop buttons was 10 pairs. 4 types of toggle and loop buttons would be 40 pairs. She really wanted to use these toggle and loop buttons until she was old. Do you have more? Qin Wanru asked softly. This. I'm afraid it will take some time. The supervisor said awkwardly. Why? And these embroidery, I also want them. They are very beautiful. How many pieces do you have? The embroidery of plum, orchid, bamboo, and chrysanthemum reflected different charm. This. I'm afraid there are only a few pieces here. If Miss wants all of them, you can take them away. As for the rest, I really don't have any. The supervisor hesitated. Embroidery was not toggle and loop buttons, and it took a lot of time to make each piece. Can you ask someone to make more of this kind of embroidery? Our miss likes it. Money is not a problem. Yujie helped Qin Wanru to say. Even the servant girl was so rich. She must be a big customer. The supervisor was very embarrassed. But looking at the rich master and servant girl in front of him, he still told the truth. These embroidery and toggle and loop buttons are all made by an embroidery woman. But the contract between the embroidery woman and our shop is about to expire. She has made it clear to our shop before that she will not renew the contract. Qin Wanru glanced at Yujie, who immediately understood. She reached out and took out 2 purses from her sleeves. She gave them to the supervisor. Tell me about the embroidery woman. She is such a good embroidery woman. Why don't you use her? She rewarded 2 purses at once. After touching the inside, the supervisor immediately dispelled his doubts. He looked around and found no one was around. He also lowered his voice and said, the toggle and loop buttons she makes are really good, but the price is too high, and there are few people who want them. Our shop owner thinks it is not worth it. So, we think it is better to fire her. Just in these 2 days. Where does she live? Qin Wanru asked. Because he took 2 purses, the supervisor was very attentive and didn't feel that Qin Wanru's question was rude. She lives at the corner of Tangdong Street. Go and ask Madame Dong, who makes toggle and loop buttons and embroidery. Many people know her. He also revealed the shop owner's secret, so his voice became lower and lower. Fortunately, he was a supervisor. If he was just a shop assistant, he would definitely not know. Thank you very much. Seeing that Qin Wanru was about to turn and leave, Yujie smiled and thanked her. She followed Qin Wanru downstairs. Qin Wanru knew Tangdong Street. It was just 2 turns ahead. They walked there. When they turned the corner, they asked an old maid in the roadside grocery store. The old maid showed them the way. The 2 of them turned into a small alley. The alley was not big. The ground was covered with scattered bluestone slabs, which were broken in several places. There were small courtyards on the side. Some of the courtyards were open, and there were many people coming in and out. It could be seen that several families lived there. The environment did not look good at all. Fortunately, Madame Dong lived at the corner of the alley, and it was a small courtyard with a separate door. After asking passers-by, Qin Wanru was sure. Yujie went forward and knocked on the door. After a long time, someone opened the door. It was a middle-aged thin woman. Seeing a well-dressed lady standing outside the door, she couldn't help but be stunned. Excuse me, is this Madame Dong's house? Yujie went forward and greeted her with a smile. Yes, I am. May I know what's the matter, miss? Madame Dong blocked the door and looked Qin Wanru up and down. She was not sure who this miss was, but she was sure that she had never seen her before. Otherwise, it was impossible for her to have no memory of such an outstanding face. Can we talk inside? Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said softly. Madame Dong looked at them again. Finding no malice on their faces, she turned sideways to let them in. After they came in, she closed the courtyard door again. It was a very small courtyard with 3 bungalows. The courtyard was also full of messy sundries. It seemed that the situation was not very good. Madame Dong took them into the house. There was a table and a few benches at the front door of the house. There was also a table near the window, but there were some messy embroidery edges, cloth for toggle and loop buttons, and brackets for toggle and loop buttons. It seemed that they were not finished and were piled there in a mess. "Miss, please sit down. Our house is simple and crude. Please forgive us." Madame Dong asked Qin Wanru to sit down. She picked up the teapot on the table with a broken corner and poured a bowl of half-hot water for Qin Wanru. She put it in a large porcelain bowl and served it to Qin Wanru. "Mother, are there any guests? Who else is here?" A woman's voice suddenly came from the right-wing room. She seemed to be very surprised. Chapter 103. A girl of about 17 or 18 years old stood at the door, looking a little delicate. When she saw Qin Wanru in the room, she was also stunned. She had heard the noise and wanted to help greet Qin Wanru, but she didn't expect that she was such a young Mississippi. "This is my daughter, Dong Xiu'er." Seeing her daughter coming out, Nanny Dong introduced her and then turned to Qin Wanru. "May I ask who this miss is?" She still didn't know Qin Wanru's identity. Yujia looked at Qin Wanru. Seeing her nod, she took 2 steps forward and said, "Our miss is the second miss of Ningyuan Army General's mansion." "Second Miss Qin?" Nanny Dong said uneasily, while Dong Xiu'er looked Qin Wanru up and down curiously. Ningyuan Army General's mansion had made a lot of noise before. "Exactly." Qin Wanru smiled and said generously. "What's the matter, second Miss Qin?" Madame Dong didn't think that she had anything to do with Ningyuan Army General's mansion, and she had never seen this second Miss Qin. So, she felt more and more surprised. "There is indeed something. I heard that Madame Dong terminated the contract with the shop before." Qin Wanru didn't beat around the bush and came straight to the point. "That's true," Madame Dong said after a moment of silence. "Can Madame Dong sign a contract with me?" Qin Wanru said with a smile. Calculating the time, Nanny Dong and her daughter should have stayed in Jiangzhou for a period of time in the last life, and finally came to the capital city. If he were to go now, it would be at least 2 or 3 years earlier than in his previous life. Second Miss Qin opened a clothing and accessories store. Madame Dong looked Qin Wanru up and down. She found it hard to believe that Qin Wanru was still a child. "I've thought it through, so I want to hire you as the shopkeeper. I wonder if it's possible." Qin Wanru smiled slightly, but the meaning was very simple. In fact, it was hard to believe her current appearance. How could a soft and adorable young lady open a shop on her own initiative? However, her identity was still there, and the reputation of Ningyuan Army General's mansion was still quite strong. "Miss Qin, do you mean that you want me to help you?" Madame Dong was still very hesitant. A childish young lady wanted to open a shop by herself. What did she know? Would he come up with random ideas without knowing anything? Would he push the responsibility to me when the shop is in a mess? You can't expect a child who hasn't even grown up to be sensible. Moreover, this is the pampered young miss of the general's mansion. It would already be good if he wasn't willful and unreasonable. Yes, Madame Dong can take care of everything in the store. Madame Dong can also invest in the store with her craftsmanship. Qin Wanru said with a slight smile. She raised her pink little face with fluttering long eyelashes, with a calm and decent look, which was somewhat inconsistent with her childish look. But looking at her clear and calm watery eyes, Madame Dong felt that what second Miss Qin said might be true. "Mom, just agree with second Miss Qin. It seems that second Miss Qin really wants to open the store." Dong Xiu'er didn't think so much. She was younger and more straightforward. She glanced at Qin Wanru and felt that she got along well with this lady. She was not only beautiful, but also had a good temperament and was even steady. Compared to those older young ladies who still pretended to understand, they were much better. Madame Dong's previous employer also had a young lady. Every time she came to the store, she not only turned things upside down, but also gave orders here and there. She pretended to know something when she didn't know something. In the end, she even scolded the people in the store, making it seem that she was very powerful. She was just the daughter of a businessman, but she was already so arrogant, not to mention the young lady of an official's family. But the second Miss Qin in front of her gave people a different kind of steadiness. Well, since her daughter also said so, she also wanted to find a job. The previous boss was about to be closed, so she had to find a way to do something. Madame Dong, I want to go to the capital with you. I want to open a clothing store in the capital, Qin Wanru said with a gentle smile in her calm eyes. Second Miss Qin wants to open a store in the capital. Before Madame Dong said anything, Dong Xiu'er became excited. Her eyes immediately lit up, and her voice unconsciously became louder. Ordinary people did not know that Ning Yuan army general was going to leave Jiangzhou. Yes, our miss is going to go to the capital with our general and will leave after a while. Recently, she is organizing things. Yu Jie said in an orderly manner. Mother, we can go to the capital, we can go to the capital. Dong Xiu'er was so excited that she turned to Madame Dong with a smile on her face, and her eyes were red. Madame Dong lowered her head and seemed to be thinking silently. Qin Wanru elegantly picked up the big porcelain bowl and took a sip of boiled water. She behaved naturally and elegantly, without any grievance or uneasiness, as if she was drinking tea made from the best tea leaves. The sunlight swept in from the window and fell on her face. It was soft and calming. Madame Dong raised her head and looked at Qin Wanru putting down the porcelain bowl. She nodded hard and said, Second Miss Qin, I promise you. Well, it should be during this period of time. Madame Dong has settled all her affairs. 5 days later, I will ask Yu Jie to take you to the mansion. When you leave, you will go to the capital with me. Qin Wanru nodded and arranged things more completely. I wonder if 5 days is enough. Yes, it's enough. Madame Dong thought for a while and said. She did not have many things here, and even the yard she lived in was rented. Qin Wanru stood up and glanced at Yu Jie. Yu Jie reached out and took out 3 purses from her sleeve. These were all the purses that Qin Feng gave her. They were all purses. Qin Wanru did not ask Yu Jie to give them this time. She took them and put them on the table. These are for Madame Dong to settle down the affairs at home. When we arrive at the mansion, I will negotiate and give them to you. Don't worry, Madame Dong. I will never treat you badly. As for the shares, I will tell you clearly now. I will divide the store into 100 shares, and you can get 5 shares with your craftsmanship. It was good enough to get 1 share with craftsmanship, not to mention that this was a store in the capital. Not to mention how big the store was, even if it was in a remote place, it was still in the capital. The rent of the store on the ground in the capital, as well as the purchase of goods, could not be opened without 10,000 taels of silver. 5 shares were equivalent to 500 taels of silver. In the past, Madame Dong only earned a few taels of silver a month in the store, so it was impossible for her to have so much money to buy shares. Madame Dong had never thought about buying shares of 5%. Now she saw the purses that Qin Wanru put on the table in person, which were full of sincerity. Second Miss, don't worry. I will not let you lose money. Madame Dong was moved and said. She had been desperate to go to the capital because she had no money to support them to go there. Unexpectedly, not only could they go to the capital, but also had such a good thing. She was very moved by Qin Wanru. Since the matter had been settled, Qin Wanru left with Yu Jie. Dong Xiu'er followed Madame Dong to send them to the door. When Dong Xiu'er walked, Yu Jie found that one of Dong Xiu'er's legs was indeed a little wrong. She walked with a slight limp. She didn't know whether it was natural or something happened to her recently. But since Qin Wanru didn't ask, of course, she politely pretended not to see it. After Qin Wanru came out of Madame Dong's house and left the alley, she was really tired. She looked around and wanted to find a place to rest. She happened to see a tea house opposite. "Miss, let's go up and sit for a while." Yujie knew that she was tired at the sight of her, so she looked at the tea house opposite and suggested. "Okay." Qin Wanru nodded. They entered the tea house one after another. The waiter came out to greet the guests. When he saw that it was a miss with a servant girl, he hurriedly led them to the second floor. There was a private room on the second floor, which was very suitable for this kind of miss to sit down and watch the street view when she was tired. The waiter led them into a small private room facing the window. The window was slightly opened, and the warm and bright sunlight shone through the window onto the table by the side. After ordering tea, the waiter left. After a while, he served snacks with tea, and then came in a pot of tea. "Yujie, you also sit down. There are not many people here." Qin Wanru looked at Yujie, who was still standing beside, and said, "Miss, I'm not tired. When I was in Jingshin Monastery, sometimes I was too busy. I didn't even have time to stand, let alone sit for a whole day. I had been running around all the time." Yujie shook her head. She really didn't feel anything. When there was a religious ceremony in Jingshin Monastery and she was too busy, she would also go to help. She had long been used to running around to fetch things and move things. She really didn't feel anything to walk such a short distance. "By the way, miss, I remember that I have been here before. There is a pastry shop nearby. It is said that the pastry they make is the best in the whole Jiangzhou. Would you like to try it, miss?" Yujie looked out of the window, and suddenly her eyes lit up when she thought of the limited scenes in Jiangzhou City. Seeing that Yujie's eyes were full of greed, Qin Wanru smiled. She knew that Yujie was also greedy, so she nodded and said, "Okay, go ahead. Pick some delicious pastry and sell it here. I want to try it." "Okay," Yujie said happily. She turned around and walked out. When she walked to the door, she suddenly hesitated and asked, "Miss, is it okay for me to leave at this time?" She was worried that someone would offend Qin Wanru. "It's okay. It's just nearby. Isn't it very fast?" Qin Wanru said indifferently. "Okay, then I'll go and come back right away." Yujie thought about it and felt that it was right. It wouldn't take much time to come and go. It looked very quiet here. After thinking about it, she went out. When she walked out of the door, she deliberately closed the door. Then she turned around and went to the stairs in a hurry to sell the pastry. Several guests downstairs came up and passed by her. It seemed that someone was surprised and said, "Ah," but she didn't care. This was the first time that she went out after returning to the secular world. It was impossible for anyone to know her. Chapter 104. What? Do you know her? The boy with a cold face didn't stop and only asked. "I seem to see someone I know." The younger boy stared at the private room upstairs with a strange expression on his face. If he was not mistaken, the owner of the private room was the owner of the room. If he was right, this girl came out from this private room. The boy with a cold face didn't comment on his words. The waiter continued to lead them to the empty private room, but when they passed by Qin Wanru's private room, the younger boy suddenly pushed open the closed door of the private room. The cold-faced boy stopped unhappily and scolded in a low voice, "Nonsense. Big brother, I met a friend. Let's share a seat with her." The younger boy didn't care so much and pointed inside the private room. In the private room, Qin Wanru was still holding a cup of tea in her hand. She was startled by the sound of the door opening. At this time, she quickly recovered her calmness. Her eyes fell on the face of the cold-faced boy, and she frowned slightly. Inexplicably, she felt a little familiar, but she didn't know this person. Then her eyes moved to the young boy who strode in unceremoniously, and her eyebrows knitted even more tightly. "Second Miss Qin, how about we share a seat?" The younger boy came in carelessly, pulled a chair beside Qin Wanru, and sat down by himself. Therefore, the so-called question was just a question, and it was not really a question. Fourth brother, how can you be so rude? Come out. The young boy with a cold face and a little bit of dignity said coldly, and his eyes swept over Qin Wanru's delicate little face. She looked like a young lady from an aristocratic family, but there was not even a servant beside her. Thinking of his fourth brother's surprise just now, he immediately understood that he saw the servant girl. After saying that, he moved slightly and was ready to leave. Big brother, this is the second miss of Ningyuan Army General's mansion, we have seen her before. The young boy raised his voice and laughed. Qin Huayong's second daughter. The cold-faced boy stopped, thought about it, and also followed them into the room, and even sat down in the chair opposite Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru pursed her pink lips, and her big bright eyes fell on the two brothers with a bit of coldness. Anyone could see that she was in a bad mood. Second Miss Qin, you can call me Child Xian. This is my elder brother. We've known each other before, so it's not a big deal for us to have tea together. Young Master Xian said casually, not treating himself as an outsider. He poured himself a cup of tea, took a sip, and said leisurely. A manservant standing behind the gloomy young man also came over and poured a cup of tea for the gloomy young man before respectfully retreating. Where did you go before? I chased after you for a long time. I didn't expect you to run so fast at such a young age. You're amazing. I've been in the capital for so long, but I've never seen a young lady from an aristocratic family who can climb over walls and run like you. Young Master Xian gave Qin Wanru a thumbs up. In the capital, young Master Xian looked at his familiar brother. A name flashed in Qin Wanru's mind, and all the blood in her body seemed to rush to her brain at this moment. Young Master Xian was the fourth son of the emperor, Prince Xian, Chu Liuxin. Her hand holding the handkerchief was clenched tightly and trembling slightly. Fortunately, her hand was placed under the table, and she had already died once, so she had the memory of a second life. Otherwise, at this moment, she would not be able to control herself, stand up, turn around, and run away. She remembered who he was. That elder brother was Prince Yu, Chu Luiyue, the eldest prince of the current emperor. Later, he was appointed as the crown prince of the Eastern Palace, but was abolished after only 2 years, and Chu Luqian became the new crown prince. Most importantly, it was Chu Luiyue who ordered her to be cut in half at the waist. That child, the sixth prince who asked her to take care of temporarily, was dead when he was put into her arms. That woman sent him to her arms, and then immediately accused her of strangling the child, and all the people around her testified that what she said was true. That day, he was clearly in the pavilion on the fake mountain not far away and had seen everything clearly. However, he did not say anything, nor did he ask anything. Without a second word, he made him pay with his life, making him the first person in the history of the Kingdom of Eastern Sung to be cut in half at the waist. He even fed him a bowl of mute medicine, not allowing him to explain himself. At that time, she didn't understand it, but after being cut in half at the waist, she was not completely dead yet. When she cried out in pain, she suddenly understood that the woman was originally with Chu Luiyue. They strangled the child, and they needed someone to take the blame. Without the child, now the only bloodline of the emperor was him, and he could use the emperor's power to deal with Chu Luqian again. She was just a pawn for him to take the blame. The blood vessels in her brain seemed to burst. How could she not hate him? Unconsciously, she picked up the teacup in her hand, and poured the tea on Chu Liuyue's face, with reckless madness in her eyes. The water was not hot, and it had been poured out for a while, but Chu Luiyue was caught unprepared. He even watched the warm water poured down from his head, and his strict clothes were also soaked. How dare you? How dare you plot against His Highness? Kneel down. The little eunuch who followed Chu Luiyue immediately screamed, and his face turned pale with fear. He hurried to help Chu Luiyue clean the tea stains on his head. Where did this lecher come from? How dare you? Qin Wanru suppressed the fishy taste in her throat, and said harshly. She stared at Chu Luiyue with a pair of bright and beautiful eyes, and was not frightened by the little eunuch's words at all. No wonder this face was a bit familiar. It was because she saw him that day, but at that time, he was wearing a formal crown, and the drooping pearl covered part of his face. The room became strangely quiet, and everyone was shocked by this scene. Chu Liuxin, the young boy on the side, seemed to understand. He suddenly broke the silence and laughed. Big brother, she thinks you are a lecher. This girl is not an ordinary girl from an aristocratic family. She is very bold. I saw her climb over walls and trees before, and then she ran away under my eyes. Now she still thinks you are a lecher. How can this little girl be so interesting? Chu Liuxin said with a smile on his face. Chu Luiyue took the handkerchief that the little eunuch took in a panic, and wiped his face. His eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face. Under the long and curly eyelashes, a pair of angry big eyes, delicate facial features, and pink lips, especially without any makeup, he had never seen such a delicate and beautiful girl. He didn't pay attention to her just now, but at this time, he couldn't help feeling amazed. But she was so small, and she was so bold that she dared to pour tea on his face. His face became gloomy. No matter where you come from, this is Jiangzhou, and no one can be presumptuous. Qin Wanru said in a cold voice. Then she turned around and left. No one noticed the coldness of hostility behind her angry eyes. At that moment, if there was a dagger, Qin Wanru even thought that she would stab the dagger in her hand at all costs. The hatred of being framed, and the hatred of being cut at the waist, made her unable to stay here anymore. She was afraid that she could not control herself, and then she would have no excuse. Hey, wait a minute, this. Seeing that Qin Wanru ran out without hesitation, Chu Liuxin was also dumbfounded. He looked back at his brother, whose clothes were all wet, and finally did not chase after her. Big brother, this girl is really brave. There's nothing else. Didn't you see her playing on the swing before? The aristocratic miss in Jiangzhou seems to be more energetic than in the capital city. There are not so many things that she can't do, and she can do whatever she wants. It's so good. Chu Liuxin said with a smile. General Qin's second daughter. Chu Luiyue raised his long and narrow eyes and asked in a cold tone. Yes, she is so young, at most 10 years old, but she is very fun. She is bold, and she is good at climbing over the wall. Brother, you didn't see how skillful she was when she came down from the tree. She is definitely experienced, and it is very interesting. Thinking of the previous scene, Chu Liuxin laughed again. Thinking of it, he was really scared at that time, but today he was scared by this little girl several times. Go back. Chu Luiyue stood up and said coldly. Brother, didn't we agree to drink tea here, rest for a while, and enjoy the scenery of Jiangzhou? Chu Liuxin's voice became lower and lower, and finally he had to be silent. Chu Liuyue's current situation made it really inconvenient for him to stay here and drink tea. You stay. Chu Luiyue said, turned around and strode away. Brother, go change your clothes and have a rest. Be careful not to catch a cold. Chu Liuxin was overjoyed when he heard it. He jumped and said to Chu Luiyue, who had already gone out, with a face full of concern. It was great that his brother asked him to stay for a walk. Without his brother by his side, he felt more comfortable to walk around. The only pity was that he didn't know where the girl had gone. She must have also regarded him as a lecher, right? However, it was okay. When General Qin returned to the capital, he would still have a chance to see this girl. Thinking of this, Chu Liuxin was not so anxious to see Qin Wanru. Chu Luiyue ignored his yelling and strode downstairs with his men. Your Highness, do you want to catch her? A guard walked quickly to Chu Luiyue and whispered. No. Chu Luiyue shook his head. Yes. Although the guard felt a little strange, he still answered and left. Miss, why are you here? Yujia looked at Qin Wanru in surprise. She was rushing back with a pastry in her hand, and didn't expect to meet Qin Wanru on the way. Let's go back. Qin Wanru looked behind her and found no one was chasing after her. She was also relieved, and a cold sneer appeared on her lips. She was still a child who had not grown up. Chu Luiyue was used to fishing for fame, so he certainly wouldn't do anything to her. Moreover, they were rude to her in the first place. They even broke the door of her private room. With these points, he couldn't say anything even if she misunderstood him and splashed water on his face. Chapter 105. Second Miss, Second Miss. It seemed that Nanny Zhou had been walking at the door of the study for a while, but she couldn't get in. Seeing Qin Wanru coming, her eyes lit up and she quickly ran to her. Nanny Zhou, what's the matter? Qin Wanru stopped and asked. Well, second miss, can you help madam to send this soup to the general? This is the soup madam made for the general in the small kitchen. Nanny Zhou said as she opened the food basket in her hand. It was really a bowl of thick and fragrant soup, and it smelled very good. Nanny Zhou, can't you go in to send it yourself? Qin Wanru raised her eyes, looked at the servant outside the study, and asked in confusion. Well, the servant doesn't allow me to go in, so I have to trouble you, second Mississippi. This is the soup madam made for a long time, and all the vegetables were picked by madam herself. For this soup, madam even hurt her hand. Nanny Zhou said with a smile. Have you seen a doctor? Qin Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered, and she asked softly. Well, not yet, I want to ask the general to see a doctor later. Nanny Zhou's eyes flickered. How can this kind of thing be delayed? I will ask someone to find a doctor later. Qin Wanru said. A trace of panic flashed in Nanny Zhou's eyes. She put down the food basket in her hand and shook her hands hurriedly. Second miss, it's not urgent. The soup of the general is really urgent. It won't taste good when it gets cold. I have to trouble you to send the soup to the general. Madam's hand is more urgent. Qin Wanru looked around and saw an old maid coming. She asked Yujia to stop the old maid. Go outside and find a doctor to see madam's injury. She hurt her hand when she was cooking. Yes, second miss. The old maid answered and left. Nanny Zhou couldn't stop the old maid even if she wanted to. She couldn't help but show annoyance on her face. She reached out and pointed at the back of the old maid who had left. She seemed to be accusing her. Second miss, what kind of doctor are you going to call? Does she know the doctor who treats madam? Madam just hurt her hand when cutting vegetables, right? Even if it's such a small injury, does madam need to find a doctor who treats her in the past? Yujia blinked in confusion and asked in surprise. Nanny Zhou's face turned red with anger, but she couldn't say anything. She couldn't say that this was something she and Madame D had discussed. If he purposely sent the bloodstained soup to the general would definitely ask about it. Then, he could explain that his wife had hurt her hand when she was boiling the soup. That was why she had accidentally dirtied the general's soup. Then, the general would definitely ask him to call for a doctor. Nanny Zhou could also take the opportunity to go out. Nanny Zhou. Nanny Wanru could. Zhou Kuden Wanru. How could a little girl like you understand madam's health? Nanny Zhou said angrily with a cold face. Now that her plan had failed, she did not intend to be nice to Qin Wanru. Madam needs a doctor to know her condition. Nanny Zhou, please go back. When the doctor comes, no one will tell him about madam's condition. I'm afraid it will be delayed. Qin Wanru said calmly. Looking at Qin Wanru's face, Nanny Zhou knew it was useless for her to stay. She snorted, picked up the food basket on the ground, and turned to leave. The manservant who was guarding the door couldn't help but laugh when he saw the scene in front of him. Before, Nanny Zhou had pestered him a lot and kept staring at him, which made him very annoyed. However, the general had given a clear order that Nanny Zhou was not allowed to come in. Now, she finally left. Is father inside? Qin Wanru came over and asked. The servant hurriedly saluted. The general is dealing with business inside. Second miss, do you have something to do? I'll go and report it right away. No, I just came back from outside and brought some delicious pastries for father. You can send them to father later. Qin Wanru said with a smile. Yujia came out from behind her and gave some pastries to the servant. The servant hurriedly took them. Father didn't let Nanny Zhou go in just now? Qin Wanru asked. The general has ordered that people in Madame D's courtyard are not allowed to disturb her. Even if there is something, they should go to Madame Shui. Now Madame Shui is in charge of the inner courtyard. The servant answered. So, Madame Dowager had already talked to her father. That was why Nanny Zhou was forced to make such a bad plan and make a fuss that her hand was injured. Qin Wanru smiled slightly. The more anxious Madame D and Nanny Zhou were, the better it was. Then, when she went out, she would definitely find the sellers for all the shops and negotiate the price. The amount of money to sell a shop was quite large. When she went out once, she could at most find a good seller and negotiate the price, but she couldn't receive all the money. Then, when she went out for the second time, Nanny Zhou would go to collect the money. When Qin Wanru entered from Chuihua Gate, the old maid was surprised when she went out. But thinking that second miss had come back like this several times in the past, she didn't care so much. Maybe she went out when she didn't see it. Now in the mansion, Madame Shui and second miss were in power. No one would ask for trouble and come forward to question her. After returning to the yard and freshening up, Qin Wanru sat in front of the window and took out a stack of paper. She wrote down in detail some things she needed to bring to the capital city this time, as well as some necessary things and medicinal materials. Some medicinal materials were unique to Jiangzhou. Although there were some in the capital city, it was not necessarily possible to find good and suitable ones. She wanted to take some with her when she went to the capital city this time. After putting down the pen in her hand, she picked up the paper to dry and then put it back in front of her eyes to read. Qing Yu, give these to Nanny Yu. Help her clean up the things in my yard, Qin Wanru said, pointing to the papers on the left. Qin Wanru pointed to a few pieces of paper on the left and said. These were originally in her yard, and they could be put away. Yes, miss. Qing Yu nodded and put away the papers after looking at them. Nanny Yu was illiterate, but Qin Wanru was illiterate, so it was best for her to help Nanny Yu clean up the mess. Yujia, do you need to add more medicinal materials? Qin Wanru pointed to another pile of papers. Compared with Yujia's knowledge of medicinal materials in Jiangzhou, Qin Wanru knew a little less, so she asked Yujia to add more. Yujia picked up the other papers and looked at them. Miss, there are a few missing. When I go to the medicine shop, I will add a few more. If I see good ones, I will also buy them. Although Jiangzhou is remote, there are a lot of good medicinal materials. Okay. Qin Wanru nodded. The next few days went well, especially after knowing that Nanny Zhou went out and sold all the 8 shops in Madame D's hands with great efficiency. Madame D did not make any trouble, as if she also went to the capital city in peace. Nanny Dong and her daughter were taken into the mansion by Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru also told Madame Dowager that she wanted to open a shop in the capital city. Although Madame Dowager thought that Qin Wanru might not be able to open a shop at such a young age, Shui Rulin was on Qin Wanru's side. After persuading Madame Dowager let go. Madame Dowager thought that if Qin Wanru could not do it herself, she could ask Shui Rulin to help her. After all, they also needed to open a few shops in the capital city, so she could help Qin Wanru take care of them. Seeing Nanny Dong and her daughter enter the mansion, Qin Wanru was also relieved. In the last life, Nanny Dong and her daughter's toggle and loop buttons and embroidery were highly praised by many people in the capital city, and their prices rose again and again. Even the concubines in the palace liked to use the toggle and loop buttons and embroidery made by Nanny Dong and her daughter. Because of this, the originally inconspicuous clothing shop became the largest clothing shop in the capital city. Many high-quality customized offerings were sold from that clothing shop. Later, Nanny Dong even won the favor of the Empress Dowager. However, Nanny Dong did not end well in the last life. Her boss threatened her with her lame daughter, so that she had to pass something that she should not pass when she entered the palace. In the end, both mother and daughter died. Qin Wanru did not know who was behind Nanny Dong and her mother in the last life. At that time, she had already entered the palace to draw portraits for the beauties. She only learned from others that Nanny Dong, who was the most valued by the Empress Dowager, was involved in a major event. In the end, no one found out the truth, and Nanny Dong and her daughter were finally pushed out. What made her feel most strange was that when Nanny Dong saw her in the palace, she seemed to be very excited and wanted to say something to her. But every time she wanted to say something, there happened to be someone else. So when Nanny Dong and her daughter died, Qin Wanru and Nanny Dong did not have a chance to talk in private. At that time, she faintly felt that the matter of Nanny Dong and her daughter was not simple and seemed to be inextricably linked to her. Later, she also inquired that this pair of mother and daughter were also from Jiangzhou. They came to the capital city to look for relatives, so they entered the clothing shop. Since it was related to her, Qin Wanru directly took action in this life. When she entered the capital city, she took Nanny Dong and her daughter with her. As for Dong Xiu's leg, she had also seen it. It was not congenital. When Dong Xiu was traveling in a carriage 2 months ago, she was hit by another carriage. She fell from the carriage and hurt herself. Although she had been taking medicine after that, she had not fully recovered, and there were even signs that her leg was getting worse. Nanny Dong was so anxious that she invited a lot of doctors, but they all said that there might be doctors in the capital city who could treat her leg, but not in Jiangzhou. The doctor's words made Nanny Dong and her daughter look forward to the capital city more and more, but they had no money, so they could only wait. Qin Wanru's invitation was great news for them. Later, Qin Wanru said that she could cure Dong Xiu's leg, which made Nanny Dong and her daughter regard Qin Wanru as their life-saving benefactor. Nanny Dong took Dong Xiu's hand and kowtowed to Qin Wanru several times. They even decided to buy a servant to serve Qin Wanru, but Qin Wanru refused. If Nanny Dong was only a servant, she would not be able to see the Empress Dowager in the future, let alone be valued by the Empress Dowager. She needed someone to be valued by the Empress Dowager, someone to talk to the Empress Dowager, and someone to deal with outside. But she couldn't be a servant, otherwise there would be many restrictions, and some things would also make people feel that she was not objective. She must be well prepared on the way to the capital city. The next few days were very peaceful, but then the peace was broken by Madame D's crazy trouble. When Madame D crazy trouble, Qin Wanru was serving Madame Dowager with the medicine. With Qin Wanru's careful treatment, Madame Dowager's health became better and better. Chapter 106. What is she going to do? Old Grandma frowned and said with displeasure. I don't know, and I can't stop her. I heard that they are going to fight. The servant girl ran with sweat all over her head and said in a trembling voice. I'll go and have a look. Old Grandma stood up angrily, and Qin Wanru hurried to support her. When they arrived at Shui Rulan's courtyard, the people in the 2 courtyards had already pushed each other and fought with each other. Fortunately, Shui Rulan, who was standing in the corridor, looked pale, but was protected by several servant girls and old maids, so she was not hurt. How dare you? Stop! Old Grandma is coming. Nanny Duan saw this scene and shouted loudly. When the people in the 2 courtyards saw it was really Old Grandma, they quietly retreated to their own groups. Mother, you have to help me. I don't care that Shui Rulan had an illicit sexual relationship with the general before she married into the family. But how dare she snatch my money? That's my dowry, no matter where it is, it's not justifiable. She She dared to snatch my money. Mother, if you don't help me, I'll kill myself here today. Madame D rushed out from the side with disheveled hair. Before she came to old grandma, she knelt down, hugged old grandma's thigh and cried. The way he shouted at the top of his lungs made him look like he had really gone mad. Shui Rulan came over and bowed deeply to old grandma. Although her face was pale, she did not say anything. Old grandma and Qin Wanru knew the reason. Nanny Zhou went out today, and Qin Huayong must have stopped all the money when she entered the door. Madame D did not dare to make trouble with Qin Huayong, so she came to make trouble with Shui Rulan, and it seemed that she was going to make a big deal out of it. Stand up and talk. You are the wife of the general. How can you be so unruly? Old grandma said coldly with her face darkened when she saw Madame D talking nonsense. Mother, I'd rather die here if I don't make it clear today. Madame D was really distressed. All the money belonged to her, and how could she let Shui Rulan, the bitch, take advantage of it? What are you talking about? Get up. Let's talk inside. Old grandma didn't want Madame D to make a scene here. Madame D's words were so unpleasant to hear. Madam, please get up first. Let's talk inside. What exactly happened? If it's really unfair to Madam, Grandma and Father will definitely help Madam. Qin Wanru held Madame D's hand and wanted to help her up. However, Madame D did not intend to pay attention to her at all. She still held old Grandma's leg tightly and refused to let go. Qin Wanru glanced at Yujie, and Yujie immediately understood. She stepped forward and pried Madame D's hands away while persuading, Madam, don't be angry. Madam Dowager is old and can't bear to see you like this. You'd better listen to my misadvice and go into the room to talk. Although her words were gentle, her hands were not gentle at all. She used a lot of force to pry Madame D's hands away, and then supported Madame D. Madame D, who was kneeling on the ground, was immediately pulled up by Yujie. Madame D still wanted to struggle, but her waist was pressed by Yujie somewhere. Immediately half of her body became numb. When she struggled out of Yujie's hands, she was already in the room. Madam, please sit down and talk. Qin Wanru pressed Madame D into a chair and comforted her. Get out. Madame D reached out and pushed Qin Wanru away angrily. If it weren't for Qin Wanru and her servant girl, she would still be wasting time with old grandma in the yard. She didn't believe that Qin Huayong and old grandma wouldn't give in if she made a scene. Now that she was supported into the room, she immediately lost her previous momentum. With one spurt of energy, the spirit would be exhausted. This was different from the original plan. Madame D was so angry that she secretly gritted her teeth. Qin Wanru was pushed 2 steps back and almost fell. Fortunately, Yujie reacted quickly and reached out to support her. What's the matter? You don't know how to talk properly. What did Zhuozhuo do to you? Why did you treat her like this? Old grandma who was sitting in the first seat looked cold. She put the teacup in her hand heavily on the table and snorted. Mother, that's my dowry. Madame D covered her face with her sleeves, stood up, and was about to kneel in front of old grandma. Qin Wanru stepped aside to give way to Yujie. Yujie took a step forward and firmly pulled Madame D back to sit in front of the chair. Madam, please sit down, bitch. Madame D stretched out her hand and gave Yujie a hard slap on her face. She couldn't vent her anger, so she directly vented it on a servant girl. Yujie fell to the ground and happened to stand in front of Madame D. Madame D, why did you hit Yujie? All she did was help you up so that you could sit down properly and talk. Did you not come here to talk nicely today, but to deliberately make Grandma angry? Qin Wanru stepped forward and stood in front of Yujie. She looked up at Madame D and said angrily. Her position blocked Madame D's way. Now Madame D couldn't even stand up. Madame D, Zhuozhuo is just a child. She protected you wholeheartedly just now. But you don't even trust a kind servant girl beside her. What's wrong with you? Old Grandma pointed at Madame D and scolded angrily. Madam. Nanny Zhou pulled Madame D's clothes behind her, hinting that she couldn't make a scene now. Not to mention that she couldn't even stand up, she couldn't make a scene at all. Even if she could stand up, it was already wrong of her to hit the kind servant girl sent by Qin Wanru. After a few interruptions, it was obvious that they wouldn't be able to make a scene anymore. Mother, please help me. Those shops are mine. Why did the general take them away to Shui Rulan? They were originally my dowry. Madame D covered her face with a handkerchief and cried. Seeing that she was out of breath, Qin Wanru stepped back and helped Yujia up. She asked her to go back to apply medicine. Yujia shook her head. She didn't want to leave at this critical moment. She was afraid that Madame D would vent her anger on Qin Wanru. Aren't the shops in your dowry still in the capital city? The shops in Jiangzhou are opened by the mansion, right? How did they become your dowry? Old Grandma said coldly. Mother, they were bought with the money in my dowry. How could they not belong to me? Mother, I have been working hard for the general for so many years. I have to take care of the backyard of the general's mansion and the food and drink of so many people in the mansion. I have never slacked off. But why did you forget the old when you have a new wife? Why do you want to send me back to my hometown? Madame D cried with tears and snot. Who told you that they want to send you back to your hometown? Old Grandma said unhappily. Where did you hear it from? Huayong is going to the capital city. How could they send you back to your hometown? Madame D didn't know how to answer. This was originally news from outside. Nanny Zhou also said that it was not accurate. She didn't believe it at first. But after so many things happened recently, she didn't believe it. Maybe Shui Rulan, the bitch, told Qin Huayong to send her back to her hometown. As for the shops you mentioned, I remember that when we first arrived in Jiangzhou, it was me who gave you the money to buy these shops. Why did you take out the money yourself? Being refuted again and again, Madame D couldn't cry anymore. She wiped her tears with a handkerchief and said, Mother, you gave me some money at that time. But it was not enough. I later paid more for them. I was afraid that you would worry, so I didn't tell you. In any case, she was adamant that she had paid for it herself. You paid for them? How much? Old Grandma's face darkened and she sneered. When they first arrived in Jiangzhou, they didn't have enough money. They did think of transferring some money from Madame D. But Madame D kept complaining that she was poor and she had no money. Later, she had no choice but to buy a few shops in her hometown to raise the money. Now Madame D still had the cheek to say that she secretly paid for them. At least 100,000 taels. I don't remember the exact number. After that, for the sake of the turnover of the mansion, we put some more in. Madame D calculated and said. She just sold the shops and got about 200,000 taels. But it was old Grandma who paid for them. She didn't dare to say that it was hers. She could only grit her teeth and bear the pain. Did you invest in every shop? The old mistress asked coldly. Yes, I paid for each shop. The business was not good before, so I had no choice but to pay for them. Otherwise, the business couldn't continue. Mother, you must help me. Madame D cried again with her handkerchief in her hand. It was something that happened so many years ago. Could the old woman really have something on him? Today, even if the old woman didn't spit out all the money, she would at least spit out half of it. Moreover, she would have to agree to some of her conditions. Thinking of this, she glanced at Shui Rulan with the corner of her eyes. Today, she would make this bitch lose a layer of skin. Madame D, you are really capable. You are so confident. Well, I will make you give up today. Old Grandma sneered. If it wasn't for Zhuozhuo's reminder that day, she would not have any evidence today and let Madame D talk nonsense. But there were not many shops that could keep the account books for so many years. Only 2 shops could be found. But these 2 shops were enough to prove that what Madame D said was nonsense. Rulin, bring me the account books of these years. Yes, mother. Shui Rulin turned around and ordered Qianghua, who was standing behind her. Qianghua asked 2 old maids to go outside. After a while, they brought in a few boxes. The boxes were covered with dust and seemed to have been there for a long time. Seeing this, Madame D's face changed dramatically. She had a bad feeling. Chapter 107. Madame D panicked that there were so many years of account books left. Madame D panicked. In fact, not only the silk and satin shop, but also the other shops, the shopkeepers would keep the account books from several years ago. They are afraid that at this time, they can directly see the account books if they can't explain clearly. Nanny Duan, open a box and let Madame have a look. Old Grandma raised her eyelids and said casually. Yes, old Grandma. Nanny Duan came over and opened a box. She took a book and handed it to Madame D. Madam, please check if there is your seal on it. Is there a mistake? Madame D took it subconsciously and flipped through it. She immediately found her seal. This account book was not fake. Her body shook and she almost fell. Why didn't she know that the shopkeepers kept these account books? She didn't expect that old Grandma had already expected this and was waiting for her here. If you still want to take a look, I can ask the other shops to show you their account books. When they have organized them into boxes, they will send them over to you. From these, you can see if our residence has invested any more money, how much profit we have made, and how much our general's residence has spent over the years. Old Grandma said in a cold voice. She stared at Madame D's face with her burning eyes and said every word she said. Madam. Nanny Zhou looked flustered. She reached out and pulled Madame D's sleeves gently. Mother. Mother, since you don't believe me, why should I look? Madame D covered her face with a handkerchief and looked heartbroken. But she didn't dare to cry like she did at the beginning, and her momentum immediately weakened. Let's put it this way. What else do you want to say, Madame D? Old Grandma continued to ask. Mother. But I have been in charge of the backyard of General's mansion for so many years. Even if I don't have any credit, I have worked hard, right? Mother, how can we live if you take all the money away? Madame D lowered her head and cried, and refused to leave. She looked so miserable. She made such a big scene today and found that she didn't make any trouble. How could she give up? These silvers will be used to purchase shops after we arrive in the capital. When the time comes, I will give you 2 independent shops. Madame Dowager said slowly, you used to have your own dowry shop in the capital. It's not a small sum to have it all together. Moreover, you have a share of everything in this mansion. What's there to be calculative about? When Madame D got married, there were several shops on the dowry list. After Madame D left the capital with Qin Huayong, those shops were still left in the capital and entrusted to Duke Yong's mansion. Madame Dowager had seen Madame D's list, and there were many shops on it. Mother, will I still be in charge of my shop? Madame D wiped her tears and said. Although she was unwilling, at least she still had some hope. Naturally, you will be in charge of it. The residents will not care about the 2 shops that were given to you and your dowry. You have been away from the capital city for so many years. I'm afraid that you will be busy for a period of time when you have to clean up your own shops. The old mistress faintly said. Yes, mother. I will try my best to clean up my shops and help you deal with the affairs in the mansion, Madame D said with grievance. Qin Wanru's eyes swept over her face and her arched eyebrows slightly frowned. She suddenly remembered something about Madame D's dowry. But in her previous life, she had lived a useless life. So she only heard a rumor and did not know whether it was true or not. Mother, I will leave now. Madame D knew that this was the biggest concession old Grandma could make. She quickly stood up and excused herself from old Grandma. Grandma, those servant girls and old maids who followed the trend and knocked over mother's things are so hateful. Madam was angry and misunderstood. It's okay, but why did those people join in the fun? It's lucky that you came quickly. If they came a little later, they would have hit mother, right? Qin Wanru walked to old mistress and reminded her softly. Mother. Madam D panicked and called out nervously. She stared at Qin Wanru fiercely. She was going to convict the servants she brought here. If they were really convicted, who would dare to follow her and listen to her in the future? Shui Rulan would be highly respected in the mansion. Old mistress's eyes flickered. Before she said anything, Nanny Duan said, Old mistress, second miss is right. We have to follow the rules. If the master misunderstands something or does something wrong, the servant has to persuade and stop them. They can't do anything stupid. Otherwise, if a servant causes trouble, there will be no peace in the mansion. Nanny Duan said this on behalf of old mistress. She was originally the head of the servants in the inner court. What she said was very in line with the rules. No one could find fault with it. Moreover, she said it completely from the standpoint of an outsider. If it was Shui Rulan who wanted to punish the servants brought here by Madame D, it would not be as fair as what Qin Wanru and Nanny Duan said. What they said was just right. Madame D, nothing can be accomplished without rules and regulations. As long as the people you brought here have smashed things in this yard or hit people in this yard, they should be punished with 10 strokes of the cane. You have been a housekeeper yourself, so you don't need me to teach you this kind of thing. Old grandma nodded. Yes. I will obey. Madame D gritted her teeth, but she had to agree. After saying that, she bowed to old mistress and turned to leave with Nanny Zhou, who was in a panic. Nanny Zhou walked in a panic and even followed Madame D closely. She was afraid that old mistress and Shui Rulan would notice her. Although she didn't do anything just now, she was Madame D's confidant. If Madame D wanted to beat Madame D, she would be in the most danger. So she didn't dare to say a word and just followed Madame D closely. After Madame D left, Qin Wanru blinked her big eyes and asked curiously, Grandma, did mother have a lot of dowry shops in the capital city? She was the daughter of the legal wife of Duke Yong's mansion. She did have a lot of dowry at that time. Except for the shops in the capital city, she should have all the other things in her hands. Old mistress nodded and said. How many do you mean by a lot? Qin Wanru looked more and more curious. She reached out to hold her white and tender cheeks and looked at old mistress with interest. Looking at this pink and tender little granddaughter, old mistress felt a little better and said casually, there should be about 10 shops, but I don't remember the specific number. So many. Qin Wanru sighed in surprise. She was the only daughter of Duke Yong's mansion at that time, so she had a lot of dowry. The income in the capital city is more than that in Jiangzhou. Old mistress answered casually and then looked at Shui Rulan. Rulan, are you okay? You have been wronged. Today, it was Qin Huayong who took the money from Madame D, but in the end, Madame D vented all her anger on Shui Rulan. Mother, I am fine. Shui Rulan shook her head gently. Since she had such an idea, she had already predicted that Madame D would come to her. Madame D did not dare to go to the general and old mistress, so she would definitely come to her. Qin Wanru had reminded her before and asked her to be careful. Thinking of this, she looked at Qin Wanru softly, but this girl was actually in a daze. She could not help but smile and said, Wanru is young, are you scared? Mother, I am fine. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said. She was really not scared. She just thought that Madame D did not have so much money in her previous life. With the income of the shops in the capital city for so many years, plus the shops that the general's mansion bought in the capital city, no matter how she looked at it, even if the general's mansion was not rich, it must be very rich, and the number of people in the mansion was small. However, she heard that in her previous life, Madame D secretly went outside to borrow money from the usury just when Qin Yuru got married. Was Madame D so poor at that time? The shops of the general's mansion were sold out, and the news that Ningyuan army general would be transferred and leave Jiangzhou also spread along with the sale of these shops. As a colleague for many years, many officials began to invite Qin Huayong out for social activities and farewell dinner. Recently, Qin Huayong was almost not in the mansion. Madame D had made trouble before, but recently she was very quiet and did not make any trouble. Xu Rulan supervised the people in the mansion to clean up. Days passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. It was also the time for Ningyuan Army General's mansion to officially leave Jiangzhou. Early in the morning, carriages were ready to take away all the things that needed to be taken away, and then the carriages for people. Old Mistress and Qin Wanru were in one carriage, and Madame D and Xu Rulan were in another carriage. As for the other servants, they were taken away in several large carriages and left together. As for those who did not have irrevocable contracts, they were given money to go home. Qin Wanru's several principal servant girls did not leave. Qing Yu, Yu Jie, Qing Shui, who was not valued but still looked obedient, and Chu Lu, the second-class servant girl, also left with them. As for the Pantang Qianyan that Chu Luchen asked her to raise, she also took it with her. Before leaving, Chu Lu asked Qin Wanru for a leave and specially went to her home. When she came back, she brought a small package, saying that it was some childhood things that her parents brought for her, and told Qin Wanru a sad news that her two little sisters were also sold. Regarding the situation of their family, Qin Wanru could only helplessly ask Qin Yu to give Chu Lu some money. She admired Chu Li's father very much. It was really not easy for a servant to do so. He was indeed a loyal servant for 10 years, but to his own family, it was too pitiful. Since ancient times, it was difficult to be loyal and filial at the same time. Qin Wanru only hoped that he could find his master as soon as possible, and also hoped that he could redeem his daughters and reunite with his family, instead of using the excuse of selling his daughters to inquire about his master's news in various mansions. There had been no news of him for so long, perhaps something had happened to him. Even if he used to be in Jiangzhou, his bones would have turned yellow by now. As expected, Qi Baiyu and Qi Rongji also followed them to the capital city. Magistrate Qi also prepared several carriages, and after joining the carriages of Qin's mansion, the carriages pulled far away, all the way to the capital city. In a courtyard in the capital city, a beautiful young man in a light fur coat was lying on a warm bed, sick and weak. His head slightly leaned against the cushion, looking at the files in his hands, gentle and harmless. Chapter 108. Master, yes. They just arrived at the capital city at noon today without any fanfare. After entering the capital city, they immediately went to the imperial palace. Xiao Xuanzi reported respectfully. Chu Luchen twitched his thin lips and said without raising his head, "They don't want others to know that they followed me, but so what? I'm just strolling wherever I go. I'm very casual. What do you want to find out?" "That's right." "Master, what do you mean?" Xiao Xuanzi looked at his master's innocent smile and couldn't figure out what he meant for a moment. "Nothing much. Hasn't Prince Zhou been looking for them for the past few days? Don't let Prince Zhou see them going out without him." Chu Luchen said lazily, and the corners of his mouth became deeper, which made him look more evil, no longer as pure and harmless as he was just now. Prince Zhou was the emperor's second son, Chu Liuzhou, and he was the legitimate son of the empress, but he didn't occupy the position of the eldest son. His personality had always been incompatible with Prince Yu, Chu Luyue, and Prince Xian, Chu Liuxin. "Yes, I understand." Xiao Xuanzi understood. It was not a secret in the capital city that Prince Zhou and Prince Yu were fighting for the throne. When they were together, they just maintained the superficial brotherly respect. One of them occupied the position of the eldest son, and the other occupied the position of the legitimate wife. In fact, it was very difficult for them to establish the throne. Moreover, there was Chu Luchen, the crown prince who was deposed before. The reason why he was deposed at that time was that he was young and didn't make any mistakes. There were some secret rumors that the emperor had promised the late emperor that he would pass the throne to his nephew, Chu Luchun. Of course, these were just rumors. Until now, no one could get any solid evidence. But even so, there were still many people who were in a wait-and-see state in private. After all, the late emperor was the emperor on horseback. At that time, he opened up the territory and was outstanding. Even after so many years, there were still some old ministers in the imperial court who secretly supported the late emperor and his son, Prince Chen. Ningyuan Army General's mansion hasn't moved yet. After reading one book, Chu Luchun picked up another one. But when he picked it up, his slender hand paused, and he raised his head and asked gently. Well, I really don't know. Xiao Xuanzi didn't think it was a big deal whether Ningyuan Army General's mansion moved or not. Fool. He lowered his head slightly to look at the file in his hand, and his face became gloomy. His face was pale, and his lips were thin and tightly pursed. He thought for a while and seemed to want to say something. He raised his long eyelashes and squinted at people with his dark eyes, which made people feel like he was a ghost. He was no longer the calm and collected handsome young man from before. Go and check when they will arrive. Yes, your servant obeys. Being stared at, Xiao Xuanzi felt a chill in his heart. He quickly lowered his head and said respectfully. He secretly wondered what he had done to annoy this master. His face didn't look good. Could it be that his master and that little miss really had a friendly relationship like childish playmates after getting along with each other for a period of time? For so many years, he had never seen his young master's childish side. Since Xiao Xuanzi followed Chu Luchun, this master had always been very steady to others. No matter when he was puckered his lips and angry, or when he was evil and enchanting, he would never be childish. Could it be possible that he and the one in Ningyuan Army General's mansion had a real relationship like playmates? Xiao Xuanzi didn't understand, because he had no playmate. Leave, don't disturb me. Looking at Xiao Xuanzi's blank look, Chu Luchun lowered his eyes again and said angrily. Yes, I will go and check it right away. Master can play with second Miss Qin again. Xiao Xuanzi woke up with a start and said hurriedly. After that, he went out and thought for a while at the door, and couldn't help laughing. For so many years, his master didn't even have a good playmate. He was beautiful, but he was a porcelain doll when he was young. Now he grew up and became a teenager, and he was also a more delicate porcelain doll. Porcelain dolls were beautiful, but after all, they were not lively. Qin Wanru didn't know that before she entered the capital city, she had already attracted people's attention. Madame Dowager's carriage was very big and spacious. She and Madame Dowager were half lying down, and there was still a lot of space. It was late autumn, and the weather was getting colder. The carriage was covered with thick cushions, which were warm and soft. Qin Wanru talked and laughed with Madame Dowager every day. After lunch, she would take a nap for a while. She lived a comfortable life. The road from Jiangzhou to the capital city was very far, and with such a large group of carriages and old people, it was really not fast. Fortunately, Qin Wanru took care of Madame Dowager along the way, so she was not in any condition and seemed to be getting better and better, which made Qin Huayong feel relieved. After getting Madame Dowager's consent, he urged the carriage to go faster. Qi Baiyu rode with Qin Huayong, and from time to time, he would come to greet Madame Dowager with Qin Huayong. Compared with other people in Qi's mansion, Madame Dowager had a good impression of Qi Baiyu. She thought that he was the most promising son of Magistrate Qi. Even though he was not a legitimate son, he was well-mannered and capable, and his future would be limitless. The carriage traveled all the way, and finally arrived at the capital city. As soon as they entered the city, Qin Huayong went to the Ministry of Personnel to report, and Madame Dowager took them to the mansion in the capital city. Qin's mansion had a mansion in the capital city. At that time, Qin Huayong's father was also an official in the capital city, so he made an engagement with Duke Yong's mansion. But later, he was implicated in an incident and was demoted. Fortunately, Qin Huaiyong worked hard, and it was a great blessing for him to return to the capital city again. When the carriages of Qin's mansion went to the capital city, Qin Huaiyong had already sent the steward to the capital city with a few capable people to clean up the old mansion. As soon as Madame Dowager's carriage arrived, the steward brought some people to the door to welcome them, and let them in. Qin Wanru got off the carriage, and secretly sent Yujia out, asking her to find a place with fewer people to rent a house outside. Then, she helped Madame Dowager to walk inside. Suddenly, she saw Qi Baiyu and Qi Rongji also got off the carriage, and she was slightly stunned. What were they doing here instead of going back to their own mansion? Madame Dowager, please take care of my sister. Qi Baiyu came over, and bowed to Madame Dowager. Madame Dowager stopped, and her eyes turned from Qi Baiyu to Qi Rongji. Her eyes were gloomy, and she said, "It doesn't matter. Our families are on good terms. Your father has not been to the capital city, and your brother is busy with the imperial examination. You are still young, so it is reasonable for your sister to live in my house. It doesn't matter." "Thank you, Madame Dowager." Qi Baiyu bowed again with sincerity, and then he raised his head and said, "Madame Dowager, I will go back to my mansion first, and I will come with my brother tomorrow to thank you." "You don't have to be so polite. You go back first. You must be tired from the journey," Madame Dowager said gently. Qi Baiyu bowed to Shui Rulin and Madame D, and then he turned and left. Qin Wanru blinked, and looked at Qi Rongji, who looked very gentle with her head lowered. So Qi Rongji was going to live in their mansion? This should be the result of the negotiation between her father and Magistrate Qi, and also the compensation for what the general's mansion owed Magistrate Qi. In her previous life, there was no such thing, so she didn't think of it at that time. Now she thought about it carefully. With Magistrate Qi's character, he would not let himself be taken advantage of. The general's mansion owed them again and again, so they had to pay something. Qi Rongji's package was thrown to the Qin's mansion. And it was the kind that they had to accept. A trace of coldness flashed in her watery eyes, and she looked at Madame D, who was surprised and angry. Her pink lips curved slightly, and she thought that it was a good idea. Madame D was very surprised and angry, not only because Qi Rongji moved into the Qin's mansion, which made her unhappy, but also because as the madam of the Qin's mansion, she didn't know about it. "Mother, this..." Madame D's face darkened, and she looked at Qi Rongji coldly. She stepped forward and stopped Madame Dowager. "What's going on?" Madame Dowager stopped and looked at Madame D coldly. "It's exactly what you saw." "Mother, why didn't I know?" Madame D's face was very pale. Originally, she wanted to take back the power of managing the family after she came to the capital city, but on the first day, she suffered such a big loss, which made her feel very embarrassed. "Isn't this package caused by you? The mansion has taken the responsibility for it. What else do you want?" Madame Dowager was more and more displeased with Madame D. She snorted and said impolitely, "If it weren't for you and Yuru, Magistrate Qi would never let Miss Qi live in our mansion." Her words were indeed impolite. Not only did she slap Madame D's face, but she also slapped Qi Rongji's face. Qin Wanru looked at Qi Rongji calmly, and found that this Miss Qi, who was hot-tempered and arrogant in Jiangzhou, actually seemed to have not heard what Madame Dowager said. She still lowered her head and was very obedient. As if she had changed into another person. "Mother, I..." Madame D's face turned green and white, and she could only avoid to one side. She suddenly remembered what Madame Dowager meant. "Go in, everyone is tired." "Rulin, is the courtyard ready?" Madame Dowager didn't want to talk to her anymore, and continued to walk inside. "Mother, everything is ready," Shui Rulin said softly. "Everyone is tired, let's go back to our own courtyards. There's no need to be so particular. We'll have a reunion dinner in the evening." Madame Dowager nodded and said tiredly. Along the way, although Madame Dowager could still bear it, she was inevitably tired. Like everyone else, she just wanted to have a good rest and didn't have the energy to do anything else. The mansion was considered big in the capital city, and there were many courtyards. Madame Dowager lived in Xining Pavilion, Madame D lived in Yulan Pavilion, Shui Rulan lived in Lufeng Pavilion, Qin Yuru lived in Yalan Pavilion, Qin Wanru lived in Jifang Pavilion, and Qi Rongji lived in the guest courtyard. At this moment, no one really had anything on their minds to talk about. After each of them had a meal, they all went to bed. When night fell, everyone in the manor woke up, freshened up, and prepared for the reunion dinner. Qin Wanru got up early. She asked Yujie to go to the outer courtyard to take away the coachman who plotted against her in Jingxin Monastery, and locked him in the rented room. Now the mansion was in a mess, and no one would notice it. This was a chess piece she deliberately kept. The reason why she kept this coachman was that he was related to the young madam of Duke Yangxiu, and he was a hidden chess piece. When she arrived at the flower hall, Madame Dowager hadn't come yet. She heard a charming laughter from afar, which was as clear as a silver bell, but deliberately made her slow down. Chapter 109. In the flower hall, Di Yan, the eldest son of Duke Yong, came here with Qin Yuru. At this moment, he looked at Qi Rongji with interest. He slightly tilted his head and smiled gently, looking gentle and delicate. His appearance was not bad. He was fair and clean and had the appearance of a young master of an aristocratic family. It was just that the corners of his eyes were raised a little too high, which made him look a little frivolous and superficial. He was watching Qi Rongji talk with interest. His attention was all on Qi Rongji, and his eyes were smiling, which made people have a good impression on him. Suddenly, he heard a servant girl's voice coming from the door. He looked up and saw a girl standing at the threshold. She was not big and looked much smaller than Qi Rongji and Qin Yuru, but she attracted his attention inexplicably. The girl stood in the doorway, stopping in her tracks. She didn't seem to have any intention of coming over. Her jade-like face was sparkling and translucent, and her long, jet-black eyelashes fluttered. When she raised her head, a pair of watery, sparkling eyes could be seen, and her tender, cherry lips were slightly pursed. Although she was still young, the bright pink color reflected off her jet-black hair, and it was enough to make one sigh in admiration. Even though she was just a little girl who hadn't grown up, Di Yan was stunned by her beauty. There was a gust of wind at the door and her dress fluttered. She lowered her head to press down on the hem of her dress. Her picturesque eyes were a little cold, but it didn't stop her from becoming the center of a beautiful painting. Di Yan was stunned for a moment. "Cousin, what's wrong with you?" Qin Yuru was so angry that her face turned pale, but she still suppressed the jealousy in her heart and held Di Yan's hand affectionately. "Is this cousin Wanru?" Di Yan stared at Qin Wanru and said. He had seen Qin Wanru before, but at that time, Qin Wanru was still very young. She was really just a child, and she looked very different from now. Qin Yuru raised her head, and the jealousy on her face had long disappeared. She waved to Qin Wanru and greeted, "This is my second sister." "Second sister, come here and meet my cousin." She had been living in Duke Yong's mansion. Now all the members of Qin's mansion had moved to the capital city, so she brought Di Yan here. Qin Wanru didn't respond. She just bowed to them from a distance, and then entered the door. However, she stood at the threshold and didn't intend to come over. How could she not know Di Yan? She had almost been killed by him a year ago. In her previous life, when Di Yan and Qin Yuru were together, they often schemed against her, and when they met in private, they often flirted with her. Once when he accompanied Qin Yuru to Qin's mansion, he rushed into her room under the influence of alcohol, intending to molest her. She and Qin Yu pushed him away and then he fell and fainted. When Madame D and Qin Yuru found out about this, not only did they not blame Di Yan, but they also asked her to apologize to Di Yan and to kneel in Qin Yuru's yard to apologize to him. When she was kneeling, Qin Yuru came over to slap her with jealousy and made her faint. Only Qin Yuru would use a playboy as a treasure to cling onto the rich and powerful. Is she really cousin Wanru? Wasn't she 11 years old? Why does she look so young? After being amazed, Di Yan was surprised again. He looked at Qi Rongji beside him, and then turned to look at Qin Wanru, and asked Qin Yuru curiously. She was 11 years old, but in fact, she was already 12 years old. Most girls who were 12 years old would have already grown up, but she still looked like she was less than 10 years old. The year before last, when Di Yan first came to Jiangzhou, he saw Qin Wanru once. Later, he followed Qin Yuru's instigation and pushed Qin Wanru into the river. Qin Wanru almost drowned. Later, old grandma guarded against him and didn't let him see Qin Wanru again. At that time, Qin Wanru was just a little girl. She's 11 years old, but I don't know why she doesn't grow up. Maybe she was born short. Qin Yuru pursed her lips and pretended to smile. She'll get better in a few years. Sister Yuru will be a great beauty in a few years. Qi Rongji covered her mouth with a handkerchief and explained with kindness. The same explanation, but Qi Rongji's words sounded much gentler. Di Yan couldn't help but look at Qi Rongji again. Although Qin Wanru was beautiful, she was still a girl who hadn't grown up. Moreover, she looked younger than her peers, so Di Yan wasn't that attracted to her. The daughter of the Jiangzhou magistrate in front of him was quite to his taste. Although he heard that she was only 13 years old, she had already begun to show her charm. She was no worse than the 15-year-old Qin Yuru. She even looked more like a grown-up girl with a slender and enchanting figure and eyes full of love. No one would believe that she was 13 years old based on her well-developed figure. Miss Qi and cousin Yuru are both beautiful, and cousin Wanru is also so beautiful. It seems that Jiangzhou is really good at raising young ladies who are as beautiful as flowers and jade. Cousin Wanru has already amazed the young masters of the aristocratic families in the capital city. Now, Miss Qi seems to be even more outstanding. Di Yan smiled and turned his eyes from Qi Rongji's face to her chest. Then, he slowly moved away with a kind smile. Qi Rongji blushed slightly and lowered her head slightly. She said shyly, "You're too polite, Your Highness. I'm still not as good as Sister Yuru." Qin Yuru's face was originally very ugly, but after hearing Qi Rongji's words, she relaxed a little and snorted. This was not Jiangzhou Prefecture, and there was no Jiangzhou magistrate who could stand up to her father. If Qi Rongji dared to treat her like how she treated her in Jiangzhou Prefecture, she didn't intend to let her have a good time. Cousin Yuru is indeed beautiful. I haven't seen her for a year, and she has become so beautiful. Di Yan's mouth seemed to be smeared with honey. When I first saw cousin Yuru, I couldn't believe that such a beautiful lady was actually you. If there is a chance in the future, I will take cousin Yuru out to show others and let them envy you. Cousin. Qin Yuru was happy and pouted coquettishly. She was very satisfied with his performance. Cousin, I mean it. In a few days, there will be a banquet at my maternal grandfather's house. How about I take you there? Di Yan and Qin Yuru had been friends for a long time. Seeing Qin Yuru's shy look, he couldn't help but feel interested and continued to tease her. Just take me there. Will I take my second sister and Miss Qi? Qin Yuru was proud in her heart, but deliberately put on a look of consideration for everyone. I think not. I have a wound on my forehead, and the scar hasn't healed completely. Qi Rongji lowered her head, and her long bangs fell down. When she raised her head, it was slightly tilted to one side and was not obvious. But when she lowered her head, the whole bangs fell down, looking a little greasy and thick. The scratch on her forehead had actually healed, but there was a long pit there, and it wasn't easy to heal. Fortunately, it was on her forehead, and with her fringe pressing down, it couldn't be seen. Moreover, it was on one side. Thinking of the origin of the scar, she twisted the handkerchief in her hand hard. Miss Qi, are you hurt? What happened? Who did you quarrel with this time? Qin Yuru's face was full of curiosity. She opened her eyes wide and asked with a smile. Although there was concern on her face, as if she really cared about Qi Rongji, the meaning behind her words made people feel that this Miss Qi was not a good person in Jiangzhou. She would quarrel with others for no reason. A miss from an aristocratic family was like a shrew, and her face was scratched. It was really shameful. Chi Rongji's face turned pale, and then turned red. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to tear Qin Yuru's face. Her eyes flashed with gloominess. If it was not for Madame D, her face would not have been injured. If it was not for Qin Yuru, her reputation would not have been ruined. It was Madame D and her daughter who ruined her marriage and ruined her future. Don't think you can get away with it after you hurt me. Moreover, it was not only her, but also her eldest brother. That day, her eldest brother, who was always calm in front of her, cried on the ground when he was drunk. Chi Rongji could never forget that. I didn't fight with anyone. I was hurt. Tears flashed in the corner of Chi Rongji's eyes, and her eyes turned red. She looked so aggrieved that she looked very pitiful. Who is so vicious that they want to hurt Miss Chi? Di Yan asked, empathizing with her. When he came to Jiangzhou, he was not enlightened, but now he already knew that a beauty was like a jade. Looking at the delicate and sad face of the beauty, he immediately felt angry. Qin Yuru was unhappy again. She squinted at Chi Rongji coldly and pulled Di Yan's clothes impatiently. Cousin, let's go and see why mother hasn't come yet, okay? It's been so long, hasn't mother had a good rest? Well, okay. Although Madame D still wanted to show off in front of Chi Rongji, she knew that this matter could not be rushed. She smiled at Chi Rongji and comforted her. First, Miss Chi has a beautiful face. The wound on her forehead is not visible at the moment. If you take good care of yourself, you will definitely become more beautiful. Chi Rongji looked up at Di Yan with a tender look, but when Qin Yuru turned her head, she hurriedly lowered her head so that Qin Yuru could not see it. Let's go, cousin. Qin Yuru saw that there was nothing unusual about Chi Rongji, and then she was relieved. She pulled Di Yan's sleeve and dragged him out. What's wrong? Qin Huayong strode in, and his face darkened when he saw Qin Yuru pulling Di Yan's sleeve without hesitation. Where are you going? What a scandal it is to pull and pull. Seeing that it was Qin Huayong, Qin Yuru's face turned pale, and she hurriedly let go of his hand and called out in a low voice, Father. Seeing his cousin's pitiful look, Di Yan felt sorry for her again, and hurriedly stepped forward to help her out. Uncle-in-law, I was planning to visit you with my cousin, but I don't know where you live, so I asked my cousin to take me there with her. He was taking all the blame for everything. Qin Yuru smiled with satisfaction. Sit down first, they will be here soon. Qin Huayong strode in, saw Qin Wanru by the side, and waved his hand. Wanru, why are you alone? Come with me. Qin Wanru nodded, and followed behind Qin Huayong with Qin Yu. She looked straight ahead and sat down on a chair by the side. After that, old grandma, Shui Rulan, and Madame D also came. When everyone was seated, they began to serve the dishes. At this time, not only Chi Rongji was here, but Di Yan was also here. The whole family looked harmonious, and they were talking and laughing. It was a reunion dinner. Qin Wanru sat quietly and did not say anything. Her eyes fell on Chi Rongji thoughtfully, and when she saw that Chi Rongji and Di Yan had looked at each other several times, a trace of understanding flashed in her eyes. With Chi Rongji's temperament, this was actually just the beginning. Chapter 110. That was the bluegrass seal hanging on her neck. It was said that it belonged to her originally, so it must be related to her family background. Mother, do you still have your Fenghua glazed cup? How about taking it as a congratulatory gift to D's maternal grandfather's Marquis's mansion of Fengyang? Madame D suddenly smiled. Qin Wanru's heart skipped a beat. She looked down slowly to hide the coldness in her eyes. Madame D also wanted the Fenghua glazed cup. That thing can't. Old grandma shook her head and said calmly. Why not? Coincidentally, Wanru and Yuru can also take this opportunity to go out and meet people. Girls have grown up, so they have to go out and let people see our two daughters. We can't let them stay at home all the time. At that time, it's hard to say. Yuru is fine, but Wanru. Madame D smiled and looked at Qin Wanru kindly. She smiled slightly and looked at Qin Wanru's dress. She smiled and said to Nanny Zhou standing behind her, Wanru is not a little girl now. It's time to go out and dress up. Nanny Zhou, go to my dressing table and take the plum blossom hairpin for second miss. Yes, madam. Nanny Zhou left with a smile. Qin Wanru bit her lip and said, Thank you, madam, but I'm still young. I'm a girl, I'm sorry. Okay, I won't say it. Madame D smiled and did not stop Nanny Zhou. Then she turned to look at old grandma and asked with a smile, Mother, don't you think so? Wanru is so beautiful, so you have to choose a good husband. You can't let others ruin our Wanru. What she said was on Qin Wanru's side, and she was talking about a girl's marriage. In front of so many people, Qin Wanru could only lower her head and look shy. His eyes were cold and gloomy where no one could see them. Madame D couldn't help jumping out when they just arrived in the capital city. She clearly knew that Qin's mansion was still inseparable from Duke Yong's mansion. She also knew that her mother was not dignified in front of the noble ladies in the capital city, so she had to go out to save face. In her previous life, her marriage was ruined again and again by Madame D. Because of her reputation in Jiangzhou, the whole capital city was making fun of her. There was no good marriage left for her. Therefore, Madame D picked some bad ones for her under the pretext of caring for her. He had stepped into the mud even more. For the first time, Qin Wanru was engaged to a playboy who seemed to be famous on the surface. Then the playboy and her cousin secretly got married. Qin Wanru was laughed at and her reputation became even worse. Originally, Qin Wanru thought that she was just unlucky, but later she learned from Qin Yuru that Madame D did it on purpose. The purpose was that the man was the nephew of Duke Xing, and Madame D just took this opportunity to build connections with Duke Xing's mansion. For the second marriage, Madame D said that she had suffered a loss in the previous marriage. This time, she must choose a man who was good to her. She didn't ask for a family background, only for him to treat her well. Therefore, she took a fancy to a scholar who had just passed the imperial examination. Unfortunately, this scholar already had a wife, but he wanted to marry her to help his career. His wife went to the capital city to find him. When she heard that the scholar abandoned his wife and son to marry someone else, she jumped from a tall building. Naturally, the marriage was not successful, but the rumor of forcing the scholar's wife to death fell on Qin Wanru. In fact, it was because this man was a distant nephew of Madame of Duke Xing, and Madame D wanted to please Madame of Duke Xing. For the third time, she took a fancy to a widower in his 30s. She said that older people would love people and would not mind her reputation. Moreover, she gave Madame D a lot of money in private. But in the end, because the youngest son of Deputy Prime Minister's mansion needed someone to bring happiness, Madame of Duke Xing acted as a matchmaker. Madame D took the initiative to break off the engagement, and then married into Deputy Prime Minister's mansion in the name of bringing happiness. Breaking off the engagement again, and breaking off the engagement again. This was the good marriage that Madame D found for her in the last life. However, in the last life, Madame D was still her mother on the surface, but in this life, she was just a madam. She silently raised the corner of her mouth with a bloody smile. Madame D's first plan failed, so she made another plan. She planned to plot against her. She didn't know whether Madame of Duke Xing, who got along well with Madame D in the last life, would also be present at the banquet this time. But no matter what, she didn't prepare well this time, so she didn't want to go. Are you going to take Wanru and Yuru with you? Madame Dowager raised her eyes and asked after a moment of silence. Of course, I have to visit the mansion. I have left the capital city for so many years. Even if I still have some childhood friends, I haven't seen them for a long time, and the relationship between them has faded a lot. It's inconvenient for me to ask for help, Madame D said with a smile, and the smile on her face became more and more brilliant, with a hint of complacency. The capital city was her territory. Even if Shui Rulan was in charge of affairs in the mansion, so what? When she went out, no one would listen to her. Shuizhua, do you want to go and have some fun? Madame Dowager turned to look at Qin Wanru worriedly and asked in a low voice. It was the best to let Madame D take Qin Wanru to the circle of noble ladies for the first time in the capital city. Compared with Shui Rulan, Madame Dowager was indeed inferior, but she was worried about Madame D. As you say, Grandma. Qin Wanru raised her head and slightly raised her watery eyes, looking innocent and gentle. She was neither eager to make progress nor directly refused, but very indifferent. It seemed that Madame D had a plan since she was so eager, but she wouldn't take the initiative to object. Anyway, there was a ready-made troublemaker in the mansion. She would integrate into the circle of noble ladies in the capital city, but she didn't want to go out with Madame D. Actually, Shui Rulan had a chance. Qi Rongji bit her lips, and a trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. She wanted to go. But there was no excuse. She was not willing. Mother, it's decided. I will take Yuru and Wanru there, and you can give me Fenghua glazed cup as a gift. Madame D said with a smile. Fenghua glazed cup. Old Grandma frowned. It's not a good gift, is it? Mother, there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, Fenghua glazed cup is not a peerless product. It's just rare. If we give it away, we'll gain face. We'll let others see that our Qin's mansion is not a bumpkin from Jiangzhou. Our gift is ingenious and decent. Madame D continued to persuade her with a smile. Old Grandma fell silent and didn't speak for a long time. Mother, for the sake of Yuru and Wanru's reputation, I will give you this Fenghua glazed cup. Madame D's smile became deeper. Qin Wanru glanced at Madame D calmly, and she could tell that Madame D really wanted this Fenghua glazed cup. Did she really think that this thing was precious, or did she have other plans? I have given it to Jingxin Monastery. Old Grandma looked up and said. What? Mother, when did this happen? Madame D was shocked, and her eyes widened as she asked anxiously. It was a long time ago. Old Grandma looked at Qin Wanru and answered calmly. This Fenghua glazed cup is a very important thing. How could you give it up so easily? Madame D probably didn't expect Old Grandma to give up Fenghua glazed cup, and she blurted out reproachfully, but when she finished, she realized that she had gone too far, and it was too late to change her words. Qin Huayong slammed the chopsticks in his hand on the table, and said coldly, this Fenghua glazed cup belongs to me. Do I have to ask you if I want to give it to you or keep it? Mother, it's not, but it's too important. Madame D's face was very pale, and she couldn't keep the smile on her face. The importance of Fenghua glazed cup was not just its value. Since Nanny Zhou reminded her that day, she had been trying to get this Fenghua glazed cup, but she didn't have an excuse. Now she used the gift as an excuse, but she didn't expect that it was no longer by Old Grandma's side. It's not important, and it's not yours. What's the use of thinking about it? Find out what gift you can give, and if it's not enough, go to Rulan and ask for some money. There are so many things in the capital city, and you can't choose a gift. Old Grandma snorted and said coldly. Yes, Mother. Although Madame D felt very uncomfortable, she didn't dare to mention it again. She lowered her head, and the handkerchief in her hand was almost crushed. Second miss, this is the hairpin that Madame wanted to give to you. Look at its quality, it's the best one in Madame's dowry, and it will be given to you in the future. Nanny Zhou happened to come in at this time, and saw the gloomy scene in the room. She walked to Qin Wanru smoothly, and handed the hairpin in her hand to her with a smile. Thank you, Madame. Qin Wanru let Qin Yu take it, and stood up to bow to Madame D respectfully. She had used it before, and now she took the opportunity to leave. Sister Yuru, I'll go with you, I've used it too. Qi Rongji also stood up, and while speaking to Qin Wanru, she bowed to the crowd and left, as if she had a very good relationship with Qin Wanru. She looked even better than her biological sister Qin Yuru. You've had a hard journey, and you should go back and rest early. Old grandma narrowed her eyes and nodded. Some words were not easy to say in front of Qin Wanru, and Qi Rongji was a guest after all. The two of them then walked out one after the other. The sky had already darkened, and the road outside had already been lit up with lights. Sister Wanru, wait for me. Qi Rongji walked a few steps and caught up with Qin Wanru. Miss Qi, we're not that close, are we? Miss Qi, please call me second Miss Qin. Qin Wanru stood still, and suddenly raised her head to look at Qi Rongji, who was in front of her with a flattering smile, and said bluntly, I've been bullied by you, and I don't want to call you Sister Qi anymore. You. Qin Wanru, how can you speak like this? Qi Rongji's lips trembled, and she said angrily, no matter what, we grew up together, and I've called you Sister Wanru since we were young. Do you look down on me after coming to the capital city? After saying this, her eyes turned red, and she was so wrong that she almost cried. Chapter 111. Qin Wanru smiled. Under the light, her delicate little face was raised, which was very beautiful. In the shadow of the light, her snow-white skin, bright cherry lips, and strange smile gave people a kind of cold and bloodthirsty feeling. Qi Rongji was so scared that she involuntarily took 2 steps back, and her heart was beating wildly. This kind of Qin Wanru made her involuntarily feel weak in the legs. Qi Rongji, if I hear you call me Sister Wanru again, don't blame me for being rude. Qin Wanru said coldly, and then turned to leave. Qi Rongji slightly opened her mouth behind her, wanting to stop her, but couldn't make a sound. She secretly scolded herself for not being able to live up to her expectations. She calmed down, and there was a little anger in the corner of her eyes, but she still gritted her teeth and suppressed it. Miss Chun-Yi looked behind her and reminded her in a low voice. There was a faint sound behind her, and someone was coming. Let's go. Qi Rongji had come to her senses at this time. She looked around and hid behind the rockery. She didn't believe that there was no chance. Cousin, can I go back with you? The sound of footsteps turned around. There were many people, and in the front was Di Yan and Qin Yuru. Qin Yuru slightly lowered her head and said unhappily. Cousin, you have to be obedient. You can't go back today. Next time, I will ask my mother to send someone to pick you up. You can rest assured. Di Yan promised. But I want to live in Duke Yong's mansion. I don't want to live here. I don't know if it has been tidied up. It has been a long time since someone lived here. Can I still live here? Qin Yuru stopped, raised her head, and looked around in disgust. Although the mansion of Qin's mansion was good, it was much worse than that of Duke Yong's mansion. Moreover, it had not been fully decorated. Many places could not be planned and renovated until the masters moved in. The whole layout looked much more dilapidated and decayed. Cousin, now aunt and uncle have gone to the capital city. It's not right for you to live at home. In fact, I also want you to live in my house, and it'd be better if you never come back. But now you can't. You know, because of what happened before, my mother is a little unhappy, and she said that she would find a new marriage for me. Di Yan comforted Qin Yuru. Hearing this, Qin Yuru was anxious. Her eyes turned red and she said with grievance, Aunt, do you not like me? He immediately took the handkerchief in Qin Yuru's hand and wiped her tears. How can my mother not like you? But you know, there are people spreading the news that you were engaged to another man. I don't know who spread it. Although it's not accurate, my mother always feels a little unhappy when she hears it. Qin Yuru's eyes lit up. How can my mother not like you? Will Aunt really arrange an engagement for you? Qin Yuru said worriedly. This time when she came to the capital city, she was very careful, especially in front of her aunt. She was very respectful and submissive, for fear that someone would find something wrong with her, and she also coaxed Madame Sure of Dukyong very much. However, Madame Sure had never said that she would arrange a marriage for them immediately. She didn't know why, but when she wrote before, she said that she would arrange a marriage as soon as she entered the capital. Qin Yuru knew her own affairs. She was afraid that Madame Sure would know something, and then she couldn't arrange a marriage with Di Yan. Now hearing Di Yan's words, she really panicked. "Don't worry, it won't happen. My mother just said it casually. I don't know who she heard the rumor that day. It's okay. Be obedient. Even if my mother heard some rumors, so what? You are the most innocent." In fact, Di Yan didn't know the truth. When Qin Yuru told him, she only said that Qi Tianyu liked her and went to Qin Huayong to propose marriage. And because Qin Huayong didn't know about her and Di Yan, he agreed. But she swore that she wouldn't agree. When she was about to break off the engagement, Qin Wanru jumped out and said that she wanted to marry Qi Tianyu. Therefore, this marriage naturally fell on Qin Wanru. At that time, Magistrate Qi only said that he wanted to marry the daughter of Qin's mansion, but he didn't say that he must marry Qin Yuru. But Qin Wanru went back on her words. She had a relationship with the second young master of Qi's mansion, and she didn't want to marry the first young master of Qi's mansion. Therefore, something happened. Qin Wanru later denied it, saying that Qi Tianyu proposed to marry Qin Yuru, and her reputation was ruined. In the whole matter, Qin Yuru played an innocent and affectionate role. As for Qin Wanru, needless to say, she was so lascivious at such a young age. How could she be a good person? "Yes, cousin, I will listen to you," Qin Yuru said softly. "Then come and play when you are free." Okay. Di Yan was very satisfied with Qin Yuru's coquettish dependence, so he was willing to coax her. He thought it would be a good idea for his cousin, who was as pretty as a flower and was deeply in love with him, to marry him. If he married a few more concubines, his cousin, who was a gentle person, would not say anything. As for his cousin, it seemed that she was not as beautiful as his cousin. "Cousin, I see that my second cousin is so young. Does she really know what marriage means?" After Di Yan coaxed Qin Yuru, a delicate but childish face suddenly flashed in his mind, and he couldn't help but ask. "Cousin, you don't believe me?" Qin Yuru bit her lip and tears fell. "Why wouldn't I believe you? Who are you? What is our relationship? How can I believe an outsider?" Di Yan reached out to wipe Qin Yuru's tears. His cousin was so weak. He must treat his cousin better in the future. He couldn't let his cousin be bullied. Qin Yuru took the opportunity to lean on Di Yan's chest, pulled his clothes, and said with grievance, "My second sister looks so pitiful, but that's just on the surface. You see, she is so arrogant that she doesn't even call mother, but calls mother madam. Mother has raised her for so many years. Even if she doesn't get any credit, she should at least call mother madam." Di Yan agreed with her, "Your family is too unruly. Even though Madame Shui is my uncle's concubine and second cousin is raised under Madame Shui's name, when she sees my aunt, she should call her more affectionately. My mother should call her aunt anyway." He didn't understand what was going on and felt that it was somewhat unruly unless his aunt did something wrong. But he didn't think his aunt did anything wrong in the matter of Qin Yuru. But before he came, his father had told him that even if his uncle didn't like his aunt, he shouldn't say anything and said that he would solve this matter. "Cousin." Qin Yuru became more and more aggrieved and directly threw herself into Di Yan's arms. This made Di Yan feel distressed and excited. Qin Yuru was not only beautiful, but also had a curvy figure. It was really difficult for Di Yan to control himself when she threw herself into his arms. After a pause, he thought that this was Qin's mansion, so he suppressed the temptation in his heart and reached out to pat her back. He comforted her in a low voice, "It's okay. Now that you are in the capital city, you can rely on Duke Yong's mansion. Even if my uncle wants to treat you badly, he can't. Well, it's late. I'll go back first. Looking at the sky, Di felt that it was just the right time to go out and play. He had an appointment today. Recently, because Qin Yuru had come to Duke Yong's mansion, she had been pestering him. Moreover, Qin Yuru was also a beauty, so Di didn't dislike her. Sometimes, he even deliberately tried to please Qin Yuru. But this caused him to lose a lot of time to go out and cuddle with women. Several of his good friends had already complained to him in private. He couldn't stand her up again today. Cousin, be careful on the way. Qin Yuru wiped away her tears, stood up from Dian's arms, and said softly. Okay, don't worry. You go back first. I'll watch you leave. When you leave, I'll turn here and go to the outer courtyard. Dian said affectionately. The place where they stood was indeed an intersection. Cousin, then I'll go. Hearing that her sweetheart would wait for her to leave, Qin Yuru's heart was filled with sweetness. She shyly pulled back the handkerchief from Dian's hand and walked in gracefully. When she was halfway, she turned back and smiled at Dian. Seeing that Dian waved at her, she left reluctantly. She had to find a way to let her mother settle the marriage between her and her cousin as soon as possible, in case of any unpleasant rumors. Although she felt that Jiangzhou was a little far from here and it was unlikely that any news would spread here, she still had to be careful, especially when Qi Tianyu was also in the capital city. In addition, she had to find a time to meet Qi Tianyu. It was not convenient to live in Duke Yong's mansion before. If Qi Tianyu couldn't be settled, she couldn't be at ease, so she had to agree with Qi Tianyu. Di kept his promise. He didn't turn to leave until Qin Yuru was out of sight. He didn't expect that there was a person standing behind him. When he turned around, he coincidentally bumped into the person. Before he saw clearly who it was, Di reached out and held the person in his arms. Child Di. The sweet voice in his arms was similar to Qin Yuru's, but the voice was more charming. He looked down and found it was Qi Rongji. He couldn't help but be stunned. But he was also a child from an aristocratic family in the capital city. After being stunned, he quickly reached out and politely helped Qi Rongji up. Miss Qi, why are you behind me? Child Di, I got lost and couldn't find the way. I turned here and saw you. I wanted to ask for directions, but you suddenly turned around. Qi Rongji lowered her head with a red face and said while twisting the handkerchief in her hand. I didn't notice that someone was standing behind me just now. Di said, and his eyes fell on Qi Rongji's delicate face. Qi Rongji and Qin Yuru were actually similar in appearance. They were both delicate and beautiful. But because she was a little younger than Qin Yuru, she was a little more childish when she was shy, which made Di involuntarily look at her. He had always been a person who had tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex. He couldn't bear to see this kind of little beauty who wanted to say something. Seeing Qi Rongji's expression that she wanted to ask but was too shy to do so, his heart swayed, and he asked softly, Do you want me to take you to the guest courtyard? When the supervisor came to take care of Qin's mansion, he had accompanied Qin Yuru several times, so he could remember the general location of the courtyard of Qin's mansion. Then, I'll have to trouble Child Di. Qi Rongji said shyly. It's okay. Since you live in Qin's mansion and grew up with my cousin, you are also my younger sister. Di turned around and led the way. He even deliberately waited for Qi Rongji at the intersection. He looked at Qi Rongji's blushing face and teased her. Thank you so much, Brother Di. Qi Rongji's voice was very low and soft, but it could still be heard clearly in the quiet night. Chapter 112. When Qin Wanru returned to Zhifang Pavilion where she lived, Nanny Yu had already prepared everything. Knowing that everyone was tired, Qin Wanru specially told Nanny Yu to let the servants go to bed early. Nanny Yu and Yujie guarded at the door, waiting for Qin Wanru to come back. Qin Wanru sent Qin Yu to sleep and asked Yujie to push Nanny Yu, who was unwilling to leave, to sleep. She thought in the yard alone. Although she brought a lot of servants, it was obviously not enough. Grandma would buy some servants from old maid Yu tomorrow, and then she would ask Nanny Yu to pick some suitable ones. Madame D could not reach so far since they had just arrived in the capital. But it was possible for the next batch of servants to be bought. After all, Madame D could ask Countess Yong for help. In her last life, Countess Yong often helped her behind the scenes. There were many things to do in the capital. If she refused Madame D's guidance, she had to find a way to attend the banquet with Shui Rulin, and the sooner the better. She was still a child now. Even if the rumors in Jiangzhou spread and Madame D secretly manipulated her, people would think that she was ridiculous and untrustworthy because she looked like a child in the capital. But if she grew up, some things would not be clear. Shui Rulin had no foundation in the capital, and she was a widow who remarried. Without anyone to guide her, she could not even get an invitation to the banquet. But there was an opportunity for Qin Wanru. It seemed that she had to take her mother to pray for incense in the near future. There was a person who could lead Shui Rulin and herself into the circle of aristocratic families. Bang! Qin Wanru, who was standing under the tree and waiting for Yujie to come back, was suddenly hit by something. She looked up and found that there was a treetop above her head. Under the dark sky, she didn't find anything. Maybe it was winter, so the branches fell off. She covered her head and lowered her head suspiciously. Suddenly, her head was hit by something again. This time, the force of the hit was stronger than before, which made Qin Wanru cry out in pain. She raised her head again to see what was going on. Suddenly, she heard a burst of laughter. She looked sideways and saw a figure sitting on the side wall of the courtyard. It was Chu Luchen. Qin Wanru covered her head and blinked her eyes. Under the light, her porcelain doll-like face was full of confusion. It seemed that she couldn't react for a while. However, Qin Wanru had never thought that this man would appear on the wall of her courtyard. Was this person's body really suitable for climbing trees and climbing walls? Tilting his head slightly, he looked at the other party's complexion with the help of a sliver of light. He felt that the other party's complexion didn't look too good. When Yujie walked out of Nanny Yu's room and saw the scene in front of her, she was stunned for a moment. Then she walked over nervously and vigilantly. Qin Wanru gently pressed her hand behind her back, signaling her to calm down and that it would be okay. Chu Luchen jumped down from the tree, walked to Qin Wanru in a dignified manner, looked her up and down, and played with a few stones in one hand. Needless to say, those were the stones that hit Qin Wanru's head just now. Under the light, his face did not look good. His lips were as pale as his face, and he did not look well. He just looked at Qin Wanru with interest. "Child, don't you feel tired climbing this wall?" Qin Wanru looked up at the high wall. The high wall here was much higher than that in Jiangzhou. It seemed that it could really play a protective role. Tired. Chu Luchen threw the stones in his hand to the side, and his body suddenly fell to Qin Wanru powerlessly. Qin Wanru was so scared that she hurriedly reached out and stepped back 2 steps to catch him. Fortunately, there was a tree behind her, which pushed her. Yujie moved her feet and wanted to come over, but was stopped by Qin Wanru. This child was arrogant, and no one knew what he cared about. It was better for her to hold him. "Child, are you okay?" Qin Wanru whispered. It was really hard for her to hold Chu Luchen, but she did not dare to let go of him at this time. It was not obvious when she looked at him just now, but when they were close, she could feel the strong heat from Chu Luchen's body. He actually had a fever. "I'm not good," Chu Luchen whispered in Qin Wanru's ears. At this time, Chu Luchen even closed his eyes, and his breath with strong heat came from his body. Qin Wanru reached out and touched his forehead, which was astonishingly hot. At this time, she couldn't care too much, and reached out to Yujie to come over. Together, they helped Chu Luchen into the room. After putting him on the bed in the inner room and raising him with a cushion, Qin Wanru asked Yujie to bring a basin of cold water. After thinking for a while, she found a small bag of powder from the medicine bag she brought. This was some simple powder to resist cold, which she made herself. Although its effect was not as good as that of directly decocting, it was at least useful. The reason why she made these was that it was easy to use. She took the powder and rinsed it with hot water. The smell of medicine came out, and a bowl of medicine was ready. After a little cooling, Qin Wanru sat in front of the bed with the bowl, and scooped a few times with a spoon. The medicine soup was not thick, and the temperature was not high, so it should be ready. "Prince, please take the medicine," Qin Wanru whispered. On the bed, Chu Luchen blinked and opened his eyes to look at Qin Wanru. He obediently took the bowl, picked it up, and drank it up. Then he put the bowl in Qin Wanru's hand, and said naturally, "Candied plum." After saying that, he slightly opened his mouth. The beautiful young man's eyes were closed tightly, and the shadow of his long eyelashes was actually very beautiful. However, he slightly opened his mouth, which really gave people a strange feeling. Was this really Chu Luchen, who finally succeeded in becoming the crown prince? Looking at him blankly, Qin Wanru couldn't remember where there was candied plum. Yujia came in with water and reminded her, "Miss, isn't there a jar of candied plum that old grandma used on the way here?" "I'll go and get it for you." Qin Wanru nodded, stood up, and put the bowl on the table. Then she took a clean towel, wet it in the ice water, wrung it out, and put it on Chu Luchen's forehead. Yujia came in with a jar of candied plum. Qin Wanru carefully picked one and put it in Chu Luchen's mouth. Chu Luchen sipped it a few times, and seemed to be very satisfied. He turned his head to one side, and quietly fell asleep with the towel on his forehead. "Miss, this." Yujia still didn't understand what was going on. She was surprised to see that he really fell asleep peacefully. "Yujia, it's okay. You go to sleep first." Qin Wanru yawned and ordered in a low voice. Fortunately, she had slept in the afternoon. "Miss, I won't sleep. I'll stay here to guard you." Yujia was worried about leaving Qin Wanru here alone. "It's okay. This is Prince Chen in the capital city. I know him. You must be tired today. Go to sleep first. There are still a lot of things to do tomorrow." Qin Wanru shook her hand and said. There were indeed a lot of things to do tomorrow. She just arrived in the capital city. If she didn't make arrangements quickly, she would be suppressed by Madame D again. "Miss, I'll sleep outside. If you need anything, just call me." Yujia thought for a while and decided to sleep outside with Qin Wanru. Otherwise, she would not leave. Seeing that she was very determined, Qin Wanru could only nod. After pouring another cup of tea for her, Yujia went out and gently closed the door. She still felt worried and didn't dare to go to sleep. She simply sat at the door, leaned against the door frame of the inner room, and closed her eyes. Qin Wanru didn't know that Yujia didn't go to sleep. She was also a little sleepy at this time. After sitting at the table for a while, she leaned on the table and fell asleep after a while. She was actually very tired in order to hurry on with the journey. Although she had slept in the afternoon, she had not yet recovered from the tiredness of the journey. Just now, she was so busy that the last of her energy was gone. Now, she fell asleep on her stomach in a daze. Qin Wanru didn't know when she woke up. She propped herself up, and her long feather eyelashes fluttered twice with difficulty. Then she opened her eyes and stared at a pair of handsome and gentle eyes in front of her. For a moment, she couldn't come to her senses and even had a feeling of not knowing where she was. That pair of eyes was very beautiful and very clean. It was so pure that no one would suspect that the person in front of her would have any bad intentions. Qin Wanru closed her eyes again and fell heavily on her head, ready to continue to sleep. However, this time her head didn't fall on the table, but fell on another soft place. Feeling strange, Qin Wanru opened her eyes again with difficulty and stared at the corner of clothes in front of her. After a while, she suddenly realized that this was a person's shoulder, and she fell asleep on someone's shoulder. She pursed her pink lips and raised her head again. What she saw was a teenager coming out of an ink landscape painting. His hair was very black, his skin was very white, his nose bridge was very high, and his eyelashes were so long that they seemed to be right in front of her. She reached out her hand almost subconsciously, but when she met his warm cheeks, she was stunned. The butterfly-like long eyelashes fluttered twice. He really woke up. "Child, are you feeling better?" Qin Wanru sat up straight at the first time, pulled herself together, and tilted her head to carefully look at his face. Although it was still pale, it was obviously better than before. She couldn't help but feel relieved. She was really afraid that he had an accident in her yard. "I'm leaving." Chu Luchen didn't make trouble for Qin Wanru this time. He rubbed his shoulders and stood up in a tired manner. "Child, how can you leave at this time?" Qin Wanru looked around in surprise, and she didn't think it was possible for him to leave by himself. Although he was a little better, he was not completely recovered. She could feel it when they were talking just now. "I can leave if I want to." Chu Luchen raised his eyebrows and glanced at Qin Wanru with some evil spirit. He walked to the window and knocked on the crossbar in front of the window rhythmically. 2 guards in black suddenly appeared in front of the window. "I'm leaving first. There's something wrong with your yard." Chu Luchen squinted at Qin Wanru and said discontentedly. "What's wrong?" Qin Wanru opened her eyes wide and looked at him. She didn't feel strange that there were guards outside the window. "You need a fish tank, the big one." Chu Luchen said in a lazy voice, "I'll send you one tomorrow, in case you can hide in it and look at the sky." After that, he didn't wait for Qin Wanru to say anything. He reached out to press the windowsill and landed lightly outside the window. Then he disappeared in the night with the 2 guards. Qin Wanru was left alone, and opened her mouth in astonishment. She blinked her eyes with a little confusion. When did she have a special liking for fish tanks? Did she have to put a fish tank in her yard? Was what Chu Luchen said true or had other meanings? Chapter 113. The woman trader came the next day. She arrived very quickly. Because she needed to select people, the old mistress sent them to Xining courtyard. Qin Wanru arrived early and only Shui Rulan accompanied old grandma in the courtyard. After greeting old grandma, Qin Wanru sat beside her and looked at the maids brought by old grandma. Today, all of them were maids. There were more than 100 of them. All of them stood in the courtyard with their heads bowed. With so many people gathered together, not a single sound was made. Overall, Madame Dowager was very satisfied. "Rulan, Zhuozhua, since you are here first, you can pick first." Old grandma took a sip of tea and said with a gloomy face. Madame D and Qin Yuru had not come at this time. They did not take her seriously at all. Madame D and Shui Rulan were the closest to them. "Wanru, you pick first," Shui Rulan said softly. Qin Wanru nodded and stood up. She did want to pick a few maids first so that Qin Yuru and Madame D would not send more maids to her. 1 maid from Madame D was enough. "Mother, you should also pick a few more maids with me. If old Grandma Ya comes next time, you may not be able to pick a suitable one," Qin Wanru said. There were many hints in her words. Shui Rulan smiled slightly and understood. Qin Wanru picked a lot of maids this time, but most of them were second-class and third-class maids. She was worried after picking, so she asked Nanny Duan to check them out. Nanny Duan thought they were good, so she kept them. Shui Rulan also picked a lot of maids. She did not pick so many at first, but thinking of Qin Wanru's words, she felt more at ease now. Old Grandma did not have such scruples and only picked 2 maids and placed them in the courtyard. Old Grandma asked Nanny Duan to train these maids together and explain the rules of General's mansion. After these maids were taken away, Madame D and Qin Yuru came late. After greeting each other, Madame D and Qin Yuru also sat down. "Mother, why are there so few maids?" Looking at the remaining maids in the yard, Madame D asked disdainfully, with a bit of arrogance and ridicule on her face. Mother, please find someone else. The capital city is not like Jiangzhou. There are so few maids like this, which makes our Qin's mansion look petty. Grandmother, old maid, you brought too few maids with her. Last time I saw you choose a few maids, and there were at least 50 of them. Look at them now, there are only a few of them. How am I supposed to choose? Qin Yuru's eyes swept over the faces of the maids, and she became increasingly dissatisfied. They had just arrived in the capital city, but this pair of mother and daughter were already very pretentious. They even did not forget to mention Duke Yang's mansion in this kind of thing. Qin Wanru slightly lowered her eyes, and a trace of sarcasm flashed across her eyes. He thought that with the support of Duke Yang's mansion, Madame D could do whatever she wanted again. Now, she even used the power of Duke Yang's mansion to suppress Madame Dowager. What he meant was that he wanted to take advantage of the situation to pressure the people in the mansion and show off his power. This so-called guarantee of Duke Yang's mansion, she would slowly tear it down. You came late, we have already chosen. Madame Dowager's face was indifferent, and no one could tell whether she was happy or angry. Mother, I have not chosen, how could Wanru and my sister have chosen? There is an order of seniority, this is not reasonable. Madame D's face darkened, and the smile on her face became a little stiff. Why is it not reasonable? I have waited for you for so long, but you did not come, so they can't choose. Moreover, I was the one who asked them to choose. Do you have a problem with that? Madame Dowager said, and frowned. I asked someone to call you here, but you did not come for so long. What are you doing? I just arrived in the capital city last night, and I did not sleep well, so I got up late. Mother sent someone to see that I was still asleep, but they did not wake me up. It's my first time in the capital city, and I do not even have a satisfactory servant. Madame D secretly hated Madame Dowager's partiality, but she had to explain. Originally, she wanted to give Madame Dowager a show of strength, but she did not expect that Madame Dowager would not fall for it. You choose yourself. Madame Dowager waved her hand impatiently, and pointed to several servant girls in the yard. Grandma, I don't want them, they are all leftovers, there is nothing good about them. Qin Yuru felt wronged, and her eyes turned red. She turned her head and wiped her tears with a handkerchief, as if she had been bullied. Yuru, don't cry, if you don't like them, you can choose next time. After all, they are your own people, and you must be satisfied. Madame D stood up and comforted Qin Yuru, and then turned her head. Mother, since they are all leftovers, we can let Yuru choose another batch of servants next time. We can't really let her use her sister to choose the leftovers. Let's use the servant girls. Whatever you want. Madame Dowager stood up and went back into the room. She really did not like Madame D's arrogant look, and Qin Yuru's look also reminded her of the concubines in the mansion in the past. Qin Yuru was a good miss, but she just said a few words, and now she was crying like she had been wronged, which was really disappointing. Qin Wanru and Shui Yuru also followed her into the room. After Madame D comforted Qin Yuru, she also followed in, and seemed to want to stay for a deep talk. Mother, we are now in the capital city, and some rules should be the same as in the capital city. Otherwise, we will be laughed at by others for nothing, and we will be disconnected from the aristocratic family circle in the capital city, and we will be laughed at everywhere. What do you mean? Madame D dared to use Duke Yang's mansion to make trouble when they just arrived in the capital city, and Madame Dowager was not in a good mood. She looked up at her and said, What I mean is to let our mansion integrate into the circle of the capital city faster, which is also good for the general's career. Mother, don't you think so? Madame D's face showed a little bit of pride. Of course, the rules of the servants in our mansion should be enforced first. Let's take what happened today as an example. If the servants in Madame Dowager's courtyard are well behaved, they should have woken me up today and come over early. How could they let me sleep for so long unconsciously? Madam, do you mean that the servants around grandmother don't follow the rules? Qin Wanru blinked her watery eyes and asked in confusion. A trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. Madame D wanted to start with her grandmother. Needless to say, the next one would be her and her mother. Did she really think that she was still the madam who could do whatever she wanted in the backyard of General's mansion? She really didn't know what was good for her. She didn't expect that Qin Wanru would directly pick up the topic. She knew it was not good and looked up at old grandma. As expected, old grandma's eyes were a little gloomy. She was shocked and stared at Qin Wanru. Wanru, what are you talking about? How could I blame the people around my mother? I'm just mentioning it and saying that my mother's people need to be trained well. Qin Wanru's eyes were dark and gloomy. Second sister, this is the capital city, not Jiangzhou. How can you do whatever you want? Just now, you and Aunt Shui chose people first, which was already disrespectful. Now, you dare to talk nonsense to mother. Who gave you the courage? Qin Yuru snorted coldly. She thought that she had caught Qin Wanru's weakness, so she could not help being tough. Big sister, I'm just talking about the matter. Why do you think that I'm relying on someone's power? I don't have any family to rely on. I'm sorry to disappoint you. But who are you relying on today? How dare you be so unruly in front of grandmother? Is this the rule in the capital city? Qin Wanru looked up slightly and said to Qin Yuru coldly. Qin Wanru had no family to rely on, but Qin Yuru was different from Madame D. Now, it was obvious that she was relying on the power of Duke Yong's mansion. Everyone in the room knew that. Hearing what she said, Qin Yuru blushed and stared at Qin Wanru with her beautiful eyes. She wanted to stand up and give Qin Wanru 2 slaps to vent her anger. Wanru, talk to your big sister nicely. No matter outside or in the mansion, you should be intimate. You can't let others think that our Qin's mansion lacks rules and etiquette. Madame D rebuked Qin Wanru with a smile. She didn't say it seriously. Coupled with the smile on her face and the meaning in her words, it sounded that she seemed to be kind to Qin Wanru. Although Madame Dowager didn't say anything, her face softened a little. I was wrong about what happened in Jiangzhou. Now that we are in the capital city, those things are not important anymore. I still hope that you can get along well with your elder sister in the future. There are only 2 misses in the Qin's mansion. You can't compare with those aristocratic families who have 10 or 8 misses. You 2 sisters should help each other to keep a foothold in the capital city. Seeing that it was effective, Madame D began to persuade Qin Wanru more earnestly. She even told Qin Wanru about the past frankly. Looking regretful, she picked up the tea beside her, stood up and walked to Qin Wanru. Wanru, now I only hope that you and Yuru can be intimate. Your big sister and I were wrong in the past. I hope you can be magnanimous. I will definitely find a way to make it up to you. After saying that, she handed the tea to Qin Wanru. She actually came to apologize to her in person. Seeing Madame D's hypocritical look, Qin Wanru suddenly stood up and avoided Qin Yuru. She bowed to Madame D respectfully and indifferently. Madam, you are too serious. After saying that, without looking at Madame D, she turned around and walked behind Madame Dowager. She signaled the servant girl who was helping Madame Dowager to leave. She went over and gently patted Madame Dowager's back. She puffed her cheeks and looked vigilant, unwilling to have more contact with Madame D. After being harmed so many times, no one could have a grudge. Moreover, she was still a child. Mother, I want to take the 2 sisters with me to the banquet of the Marquis's mansion of Fengyang. It's my first time in the capital city, so I have to take them around, so that they don't show weakness and lose face in the future. Madame D was ignored there. She suppressed the impatience in her heart and returned to her seat with the teacup with a hollow smile. So, this was the main purpose of Madame D. But Madame D had never been so enthusiastic. Qin Wanru reached out and rubbed her forehead. There were some things that she couldn't remember clearly. Some of the memories of her last life were fragmented. For example, how was the marriage between her and the libertine arranged? It seemed that they had met at the banquet early. Could it be this banquet? She wanted to attend the banquet as soon as possible, but not with the scheming Madame D. She had a better candidate. Grandma, I don't want to attend the banquet. I want to worship Buddha with Aunt Shui tomorrow. The master of Jingshin Monastery said that Huaguang Temple in the capital city has the best incense. How about I go with Aunt Shui tomorrow? Chapter 114. Huaguang Temple is really famous. I've heard about it more than once when I was in Jiangzhou. I really have to go and have a look. Madame Dowager was a Buddhist. Hearing what she said, she nodded repeatedly. Grandma, are you going too? Qin Wanru took the opportunity to ask. I won't go now. There are so many things to deal with in the mansion. Zhuozhuo and Rulan can go and have a look first. When I'm free in the future, you can accompany me. Old Grandma smiled. Mother, I won't go either. The mansion is too messy. Someone has to clean it up. Shui Rulan really wanted to go there. She was also a quiet person. Besides, Huaguang Temple had a great reputation. Mother and Wanru go there and have a look. I will go there next time when I have a chance. Qin Huayong had already made it clear that she was in charge of the affairs in the backyard. Now that the mansion was in a mess and there were many things to deal with, it was really not a good time to go out. Madame Dowager hesitated. She also felt that it was not the best time for Shui Rulan to travel. Grandma, my mother and I will go there for a while to find the way. We won't stay for long. I've asked around, and it will take at most 2 hours. Let's go early and come back early. When we come back, we might be able to make it in time for lunch. There won't be any delay. Qin Wanru pleaded on the side. If it was so close, it wouldn't be a problem. Looking at her granddaughter's eager look, Madame Dowager was relieved and said to Shui Rulan with a smile, Rulan, just take her there, lest this little monkey can't stay there. You can go early and come back early, and it won't be a problem. In the future, if you really manage things, it won't be so convenient for you to go out. These words were said with deep meaning. Thinking about it, it was indeed the case. He had just arrived in the capital and was about to officially take charge of the affairs of the capital. It was true that he couldn't leave for a while. In addition, it was already winter. If he delayed it for a while, it would be the new year. There would be all sorts of ceremonies and there would be even more things to do. He couldn't even steal half a day of leisure even if he wanted to. It was better to take advantage of the time when the old mistress was tidying up and slack for half a day. Thinking of this, Shui Rulan was also moved, then. Mother, Wanru and I will go there and come back soon. I'm going to meet some old stewards tomorrow to ask about some old affairs. It's fine for you two to play a little longer. The old mistress said with a smile. They were chatting and laughing, leaving Madame D and her daughter in the cold. Madame D and Qin Yuru and Qin Huayong mansion were Madame D and Qin Huayong. She came to the capital to Qin Huayong Qin. Suppressing the jealousy in her heart, she put on a peaceful smile and said, Mother, Yuru and I want to go to Duke Yong's mansion. We haven't visited my father and mother since we came to the capital city. You should go too. The old madam nodded. General, do you want to go with me? Madame D asked again. Qin. To go there. Madam D, she Qin, you Qin. Madam. Qin, said, Qin, to Madam, Madam, Qin. She had purposely drafted this gift list, and she had purposely made it smaller. Old Madam took the gift list and glanced at it. She frowned. This is too little. Add a few more. Mother, the money for the shop. Mrs. Qin looked embarrassed. I'll ask Nanny Duan to buy a few more for you later. Madame Dowager interrupted her crying. Thank you, mother. Then tomorrow I will go back to my mother's home with the general. Madame D looked proud. She turned to Shui Rulin and said with a smile, Sister, I wanted to go with you tomorrow, but now I can't. She was showing off that Qin Huayong was accompanying her and not Shui Rulin. Just go ahead. Shui Rulin said calmly, as if she didn't notice that Madame D was deliberately showing off to her. Early in the next morning, both Qin Wanru and Shui Rulin got up early. They took the same carriage, each with a servant girl, and went to Huaguang Temple. When they arrived at Huaguang Temple, it was just dawn, but there were already a lot of pilgrims. Huaguang Temple deserved to be the largest temple in the capital. They stopped the carriage in the parking lot outside the mountain gate and found that a lively market had been formed outside. There were all kinds of shops selling incense and candles, delicacies, and flowers. There were even silk and satins in simple shops. When pilgrims came to Huaguang Temple, they could not only worship Buddha but also go to the market. It was very lively. It was also the first time for Qin Wanru and Shui Rulin to see such a lively mountain gate. They looked up at the tall mountain gate behind them and had to sigh again. The first temple in the capital and the royal temple was really extraordinary and better than they had imagined. They decided to go to the main mountain gate to climb the mountain. After entering the main mountain gate, there were steps. The high steps extended up to the real Huaguang Temple. With so many steps superimposed, the original hustle and bustle also fell behind. Looking back, they found that it was the hustle and bustle under their feet. A distant bell came from the top of their heads, dispelling the annoyance in their hearts. Even if they had not yet arrived at the real Huaguang Temple, they already had a sense of being free from vulgarity. The road to climb the mountain was very long. It was said that this road was also called Wenqin Road. Qin Wanru had come here once in her last life. After walking on this Wenqin Road, she walked to this section of mountain steps and looked up at this section of mountain steps. She had a feeling of being separated from the world. It was still early, and there were not many people climbing the mountain. Looking from where they were, they could only see an old woman walking up with a servant girl and an old maid in the distance. The old woman was not wearing very gorgeous brocade clothes, just like an ordinary rich family. At this moment, she might be tired, so she stopped and stood on the steps to take a rest. Seeing this old woman, Qin Wanru's eyes flashed with excitement, and she held the handkerchief tightly. She knew this old woman in her last life, and she was the person she was looking for this time, Rui, and Great Elder Princess. Rui, and Great Elder Princess was the emperor's aunt. At that time, she married General Shi, who accompanied the former emperor to open up the territory. Unfortunately, General Shi died on the battlefield, so she raised her daughter alone. After her daughter grew up and got married, she devoted herself to the affairs of worshipping Buddha. Her favorite place was Huaguang Temple. In fact, she not only came to worship Buddha, but also came early to climb this Wenqin Road, which led to the main gate of Huaguang Temple. Wenqin Road was about one's original heart. This was originally the question of where one's original heart was in Buddhism. She would almost come here on the first 3 days of every month, and today was the 3rd day of this month. In her last life, Qin Wanru also met Rui, and Great Elder Princess here. Seeing that she insisted on climbing more than half of the steps in one breath, Great Elder Princess was very fond of her at that time and once invited her to visit Great Elder Princess's mansion. After that, Great Elder Princess did send invitations to Qin's mansion several times to invite Qin Wanru to visit, but Madame D refused with various reasons. In the end, it was Qin Wanru who was invited and Qin Yuru who went. As time went by, Rui, and Great Elder Princess lost interest in it and didn't send any more invitation cards. Suddenly, the scene of Qin Yuru attending Great Elder Princess's banquet in her last life appeared in her mind. Great Elder Princess invited the miss of our Qin's mansion. Look at you. With such a reputation, you will lose the face of our Qin's mansion. When the things in Jiangzhou spread, you still have the face to go out. Qin Yuru stood in front of Qin Wanru in gorgeous clothes. She looked arrogant and disdainful, as if Qin Wanru was the lowest mud. If people talk about it when they go out, even we will feel ashamed. That's right. You don't even look at your reputation. You are even worse than an innocent servant. It was the voice of the servant girls who followed Qin Yuru. They all looked at Qin Wanru with their chins. They did not think that they were just servants and Qin Wanru was the master and Mississippi. In her last life, in the backyard of Qin's mansion, she was even worse than a servant. However, Qin Yuru had received several invitations from Rui, and great elder princess. For the sake of Rui, and great elder princess, everyone would take the initiative to send an invitation to any banquet in the future. Finally, she successfully became one of the few talented women in the capital and became famous in the capital. Qin Yuru took a light breath and closed the coldness in her eyes. Then she looked up and her eyes fell on the kind face of Rui, and great elder princess, and her heart slowly warmed up. In this life, she would never waste the kindness of great elder princess, nor would she let Qin Yuru trample on the kindness of great elder princess to be favored by the circle of noble ladies in the capital. Mother, let's go up quickly. After thinking it through, Qin Wanru whispered to Shui Rulan, I heard that this is the road of self-examination in Huaguang Temple. It still asks the heart. The longer you persist, the more you can ask the heart. Okay. Shui Rulan looked up at the almost endless steps and nodded. She also had a lot of worries in her heart. She didn't know whether what she was doing now was right or wrong. Maybe it was what she needed to ask the heart with the help of these steps. They climbed up together with the servant girl. When passing by Rui, and great elder princess, she specially smiled at Rui, and great elder princess, but she didn't stop and continued to go up. The girl with pink makeup and a pair of watery eyes were very attractive. When looking carefully, one would find that she had delicate facial features, long eyelashes, and small pink cherry lips. She looked like a porcelain doll. Rui, and great elder princess let out a soft, ah, and watched Qin Wanru walk past her. She was so small. Not only did she walk by herself, but she also looked back from time to time to pull the young woman walking behind her. Great elder princess, what's the matter? Her personal old maid, Nanny Gao, followed her to climb the steps. Hearing her surprised voice, she hurriedly asked. Such a beautiful girl. Which mansion does she come from? Great elder princess looked at Qin Wanru who was slowly going away with a smile and asked curiously. She was so beautiful and so sensible at such a young age, which really made people like her from the bottom of their hearts. I haven't seen her before. Nanny Gao narrowed her eyes and thought for a while, but she couldn't remember which mansion she came from. Maybe she is not from the capital. She could only guess so. What a beautiful and sensible girl. Great elder princess sighed softly. Chapter 115. Of course, I can go. I have climbed the mountains so many times. How could I lose to a child? Seeing that Qin Wanru was far ahead of her, great elder princess let go of her worries and stepped on the first step unwillingly. Qin Wanru was still climbing up the mountain step by step. Shui Rulan had already run out of strength, so she stood in the middle to rest. Only she continued to climb up with Yujie. Yujie grew up on the mountain. Although she was tired, she could still bear it. Qin Wanru's body was not as good as hers. At this time, her face was pale, and even her pink lips were pale, but she still continued to climb up. Miss, do you want to stop and have a rest? Yujie saw that she was an arrow at the end of its flight and wanted to reach out to help her. Qin Wanru shook her hand. She almost had no strength to speak now. She just climbed up the mountain fiercely. Only by going higher could she attract the attention of Rui, and great elder princess. In her previous life, she had suffered many tragedies, and her life was dark and desperate. Therefore, on this section of Wenxin Road, she climbed up desperately and tried to climb up the mountain. She wanted to show her piety to Buddha and ask for a turnaround in her fate. This attracted the attention of Rui, a great elder princess, and she directly said that she liked her persistence. In this life, she was reborn. She couldn't lose to her previous life. Her breathing became heavier and heavier. Between heavy breaths, Qin Wanru could almost feel the dry and fishy smell in her throat. She gritted her teeth and tried hard again. She didn't look back to see how many steps she had walked, nor did she look up to see how many steps she had not walked. She climbed up step by step with her tenacity. Hey, this girl is still walking. When Nanny Gao accompanied Rui, a great elder princess, to stand still and take a rest, she looked up and saw that Qin Wanru was still going up. She couldn't help but be surprised. Rui, a great elder princess, wiped the sweat on her head and narrowed her eyes. Although she was old, she often came to climb the mountain, so her body was better than that of ordinary young people, especially the madams and misses of aristocratic families. Almost no one could compare with her. But the girl who looked like a porcelain doll was still climbing and didn't stop, which attracted her attention. The girl's tenacity really amazed her, and there was a familiar love. I'll ask which family the girl is from. Rui, a great elder princess, couldn't help saying, at such a young age, he can be so tenacious and insist on doing one thing. Yes, great elder princess. Gao Mama also wiped the sweat on her head. Let's go up. We can't lose to a little girl, can we? Rui, a great elder princess, said with a smile. She took another step, adjusted her breath, and continued to go up. When he passed by Shui Rulan, he deliberately took a look at her and found that she was not young. She was at least 25 years old and should be the mother of the girl above. Smiling kindly at her, Rui, and great elder princess, continued to climb up. Shui Rulan was not in good health. She used to live quietly in the backyard of Qin's mansion. She didn't even see a passerby, so how could she exercise? At this time, she felt hot from walking and had to stop. Seeing an old woman smiling kindly at her when passing by, she smiled back at Rui, and great elder princess, softly. Rui, and great elder princess, had a good impression of his gentle and kind behavior. This pair of mother and daughter were both well-educated and well-mannered. Qin Wanru couldn't stand steadily near the last step. She slipped and almost fell down. Yujie wanted to hold her, but she was too tired now. Although she could hold on, her footsteps were very weak and her reaction was a little slow. She only had time to hold one of Qin Wanru's hands. Seeing Qin Wanru's face changed, her lips turned as white as snow, and her body tilted to one side, Yujie immediately knew that it was not good and stretched out the other hand to hold Qin Wanru. Miss, what's wrong with you? Qin Wanru held Yujie's hand and gasped hard. Her palm-sized face was as white as snow. She couldn't come to her senses for a long time. I seem to have twisted my ankle. Qin Wanru gasped and suppressed the bloody taste in her throat. Beads of sweat fell from her face as if it was a scorching summer day. She felt a little dizzy. Miss, let me carry you up. Looking at the end, which was not far away, Yujie squatted in front of Qin Wanru. I don't need you to carry me. I will go up. Qin Wanru shook her head. But you have hurt your ankle. How can you go up later? Yujie said worriedly. It's okay. I just need a rest. Qin Wanru shook her head firmly again. She gasped and closed her eyes, feeling dizzy for a while. She was really exhausted today. At this moment, she was so sore that she almost didn't want to move anymore. She lowered her body and reached out to pinch her ankle. Although it was a little painful, it was not very serious. It seemed that the injury was not serious. Wait a minute, I will go up. Qin Wanru stood up and insisted. Seeing that she was still so persistent, Yujie helplessly helped her to stand on the side of a big stone. There was a smooth place on the big stone beside the steps. In the past, there should be a lot of people resting and sitting here. Yuji helped Qin Wanru to sit down on that smooth place. Yuji squatted down and also wanted to help Qin Wanru check her ankle, but was stopped by Qin Wanru with a wave of her hand. Wait until we go up the mountain. This place is crowded, not very polite. Qin Wanru slowed down a little, wiped the sweat on her face with a handkerchief, and shook her head. There were many requirements for women in aristocratic family etiquette. How could she check her ankle in this place where people came and went? Miss, what's wrong? Do you need help? Nanny Gao helped Rui and great elder princess and finally reached this step. Looking at Qin Wanru, who was supported by a servant girl and whose face was as pale as snow, Rui and great elder princess signaled Nanny Gao to come and ask her. It didn't look good to climb such a long step at once. Thank you. Nanny. I am fine. Qin Wanru smiled and shook her head. Miss, what's wrong with your foot? Looking down and seeing Qin Wanru slightly tiptoeing, Nanny Gao asked with concern. I accidentally sprained it. Qin Wanru bit her cherry lips that hadn't recovered for a while, with a little childish shyness. You still want to walk after spraining your ankle? What a child. Rui and great elder princess walked over with pity and inexplicably had a good impression of the girl in front of her. Whether it was the delicate little face, the stubborn temper that refused to admit defeat, or the toughness, they all reminded her of a person in her memory. Her heart softened and she asked with concern. Thank you, madam. I am fine. Qin Wanru said with a smile, reached out to hold the stone on one side, and wanted to stand up to salute her. You are injured. Why do you still salute? Don't be so polite. Looking at her sweaty hair and pale little face, Rui and great elder princess felt more and more pity for her. She reached out and motioned her to be excused. How can you go up like this? You'd better ask someone to carry you up. Anyway, there are only a few steps. Thank you for your concern, madam. I heard that this road is the Buddhist road of self-examination. I can finish it, but I want to finish it by myself. A shy smile appeared on Qin Wanru's face. She was very childish, and her sweaty face was a little embarrassed and pale. Well, then I will walk with you today. Rui and great elder princess smiled and took the initiative to reach out to help her. There were only a few steps left, but in fact, most people would not walk the last few steps when they reached Qin Wanru's situation. Even if it was just a few small steps, they would still feel that it was extremely difficult. If the psychological endurance was insufficient, it would produce inertia. When Qin Wanru stood on the steps and saw the magnificent temple, she deeply exhaled a foul breath. Yujie helped her to sit down on the stone stool on one side and waited for Shui Rulan to come up. Nanny Gao also helped Rui and great elder princess to sit opposite Qin Wanru. After all, she was old, and now she was also panting. There was tea on the stone table. Yujie poured 2 cups for them, and it was still hot. Which mansion are you from? Why haven't I seen you before? Rui and great elder princess took a sip of tea, calmed her breath, and asked with a smile. My father is Ningyuan Army General, who just came to the capital city to report on his work. Qin Wanru said with a smile. Her skin was very white, as translucent as snow. Now that she had recovered, her snow-like skin was once again reflecting a pink hue. Her pair of large eyes, under her long eyelashes, appeared clean and gentle. Her dark red lips made her look even more beautiful, yet she gave off the feeling of being as white as snow. If great elder princess had not seen it with her own eyes, it would be hard for her to believe that such a fair girl could be so resilient just now. You deserve to be the descendant of a general's family. You are really amazing. Although Rui and great elder princess was not familiar with who Ningyuan Army General was, it did not prevent her from liking the descendant of a general's family a little more and praising her sincerely. She was married to a general. Compared with those complicated civil officials, Rui and great elder princess felt that generals were more straightforward and more pleasing to the eye. Old grandma, you flatter me. Qin Wanru slightly lowered her head and smiled with a little embarrassment. When did you arrive in the capital city? Rui, and great elder princess looked at Qin Wanru and asked in a good mood. Well, I just arrived yesterday. I heard the reputation of Huaguang Temple, so I came here with my mother early in the morning. Qin Wanru did not hide, raised her head and answered straightforwardly and cleverly. She was generous and quiet, which was very likable. Is the one below your mother, the wife of Ningyuan army general? Rui, and great elder princess asked casually. She is my mother, but my mother is my father's co-wife. She used to be my father's cousin. Qin Wanru bit her lip and hesitated for a moment, so her words were a little vague. Your father's cousin? Rui, and great elder princess felt that there was something wrong with it, so she specially asked again. He married her to take care of me. I am naughty, and my father doesn't trust me. Qin Wanru's words became more and more vague. When she spoke, she seemed to be a little uneasy. The handkerchief between her fingers was twisted a few times, but it fell down again. It seemed that she actually did not know how to phrase it. Rui, and great elder princess had experienced many things, so she had long understood that there must be something wrong with it. So she did not ask in detail and immediately asked, in a few days, I will hold a banquet in my mansion. How about I send you an invitation to come and play? You are. Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes and asked in confusion, You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.